It is 4 p.m. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes and then start the conference.
Have you checked if Ravi Pandit has logged in? I see.
Yes, sir. I'm just checking. We are waiting for.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for him to log in first.
Yes, sir.
I spoke to him today morning, so he's very much going to join.
So Mr. Ravi Pandit is having some problem to log in, so he'll be joining in a minute or two.
No, you should have got a panelist connection.
I'm talking about the same link. Yeah, I got the same mail. Panelist link. I'm using the panelist link.
Same I used.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. Dr. Mashalkar joined it.
Yeah, but it is asking for passport.
Passport kai?
Capital, all capital, climate.
Bol.
Hi, sir. The passcode is climate, all capital.
CLIMAT.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Passcode is
No, take care. I think there was some problem, so that I had to change. I hope you're able to go through. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah. So we have already 79 online.
Yes.
And 1 past 4.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Aditi, you can wait for a few minutes and then start.
Yeah. So Aditi did not. I did not passport. I kept on trying.
Oh, sorry. Actually, it was there in the email, but even would be required for panelists. So.
No, email didn't have the passport.
Oh, okay.
Our apologies.
No problem.
Yeah, it's a mistake from our side.
No problem, Amit.
Are we looking forward to some new wisdom from you now?
I'm not sure about that.
It is interesting. I'm recording the fireside chat with Mukesh at 7.
Oh.
So their crew is coming up and taking over my study room.
Oh.
So we had to do the switching. I was going to give closing remarks today, which I give tomorrow.
I see.
Vijay will give today. That's how.
Oh, okay.
I think you have to be prepared with all adaptability and all agility for all changes all the time.
Yes, that is true.
So government has announced the green energy policy.
Yeah, the hydrogen policy yesterday. Green hydrogen policy.
How did you find it?
No, I think it is very good. So it is really focused on the green hydrogen with electrolyzer. And essentially it says that the transmission charges will not be levied.
Yeah.
And so which is a good thing,
Interstate, no?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so at least the interstate one will go out.
Hmm.
Now we have to see what the states do.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think at least in the BJP states, it will be followed through.
Yeah.
And we will have, then they are saying that this will be a part of the RPO obligations of the states, which is also good. They are looking at now export of ammonia, green ammonia.
Yes.
They are looking at ports and all that. So I think fairly comprehensive.
Yeah. Very good.
I think, should we begin the session, sir?
Yeah, it is 6 minutes past 4.
Yes. Okay. Hello, good evening, everyone. We welcome all our speakers, and we are looking forward to the exciting day one of the Decade of Change conference. Thank you all for joining us today. We welcome you to the online PIC Climate Conference organized by Energy, Environment and Climate Change, that is EECC vertical of Pune International Center. PIC is a think tank in its 10th year, which focuses on public policy research and advocacy in diverse areas like technology, social innovation, governance, national security, social sciences, as well as energy, environment and climate change and climate action. The EECC vertical, led by Professor Amitabh Malik, was started in 2018, and it focuses on climate policy and research. A founder member and trustee of Pune International Center, Professor Malik is also the convener for the conference. We request the audience to share any comments in the Zoom chat option with everyone. And you may also share the questions in the Q&A section. We will take them during the Q&A discussion. Please do mention any specific speaker if you have any in mind while asking the question. This session will be broadcast live on YouTube and recorded for sharing on other platforms. I'll introduce the conference in a bit. Building upon the PIC Economic Climate Conference in January 2021, this year's 2022 conference will explore what should the new future look like in a decarbonized world and how to enable it. It will also bring out the cost of inaction that we will incur with the grave impacts of climate change. The conference will have 4 online sessions, 2 sessions on each day. It will bring together 22 distinguished speakers with diverse experience and deep expertise. India is already navigating a climate challenged world. Being a tropical country, we will be severely affected by climate change in terms of productivity, economy, as well as human health. India is also highly vulnerable to climate risks like rising heat, unseasonal rains, and frequent intense cyclones. Thus, economic practices and strategies need to shift rapidly to renewable energy and low carbon technologies so that a green economic progress is achieved. For the desired transformation in society, economy, industry, and government, uniting them together will be important. This conference will offer a platform for discussions on creating a framework for progressive decision making and chartering pathways for planetary well-being with specific ideas for India. The 2022 Decade of Change Conference of the Pune International Center will try to provide momentum towards the fulfillment of climate action. It will be presenting what changes are required to lay out foundations in this decade for fostering a net carbon neutral and environmentally responsible world. I'm happy to introduce our keynote speaker for the conference, Mr. Ravi Pandit. He is the co-founder and chairman of KPIT Technologies Limited, a leading company in product engineering and IT consultation services, especially in the automotive and transportation, manufacturing, and energy and utilities sector. He has been instrumental in building a unique partnership-based model on the tenets of innovation and sustainable development. Mr. Ravi Pandit has deep interest in social issues and is founder of and trustee of Janavani and founder trustee of Pune International Center. I request Ravi Pandit sir to give his address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aditi. Esteemed guests at this session, Dr. Mashelkar, Professor Amitabh Malik, Vaidya, and other fellow climate enthusiasts or climate passion people. So it's indeed my pleasure to be here with you this evening. What I would like to cover in my talk is broadly how do we see or how should we see the decade ahead? What is it that we all need to do jointly and collectively? I would like to begin by first complimenting PIC and especially my colleague, Professor Amitabh Malik, for coming up with this conference, which is extremely topical. You know, this talks about the decade of change. When you talk about the decade of change, you are essentially bringing out what is the enormity of the task involved and what is the urgency of the task involved. And these are the two very important issues in my opinion. Now, to this gathering who has come for this session, I need not talk about what is the climate change problem. Because, you know, if we were not fully into this, we would have probably not be talking about it. You would not be here. But, you know, I think this is an extraordinarily important issue. And this is an issue that all of us should really be concerned about. What I would like to talk about is not just the issue from an overall world perspective, but also how this is so critical an issue from an India perspective. And there are a few data items which I would like to bring out. So, you know, it says that if we don't change rapidly, more than 75% of the Indian districts will end up being extreme event hotspots. More than,
sir, are you sharing VT by any chance?
No, I'm not sharing.
Okay, fine. Actually, we can't see your video. So.
No, I'm not showing a video.
Okay, fine. Sorry. Yes, please continue.
More than 40% of the Indian districts, you know, are already beginning to experience swapping trends. Swapping trends means where there is extremely low rain, suddenly you get very high rain. Where there is high rain, there is suddenly very low rain available. It is believed that 80% of India's population live in the districts which are highly vulnerable to extreme hydromet disasters. There is, in the last 40 odd years, there is a 12 times increase in the number of associated cyclonic events and a 20 times increase in the flood events. So, can you hear me or you cannot hear me?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
And so this is the current challenge that we are really facing. So now the question is, how do we address this? You know, I personally believe that wherever there is a challenge, there is an opportunity. And I think we need to look at the opportunity very closely in order to ensure that we make the best of the challenge that we are currently facing. So how do you address the current issue that we have in a way in which we tide over the current problem that we have? You know, so and this is something that calls for a radical as well as sustainable, a radical yet sustainable change. And this is actually the topic, main core of the book that Dr. Mashelkar and me wrote some time ago. And what we do there, we present a model whereby you can make a radical and sustainable change. And we talk about 4 levers. And in my opinion, to address the problem that we currently have, we need to address and kind of work on all the 4 layers. And the 4 levers that we talk about are societal engagement, technology, economic policy, and an economic model. Now, I want to talk very briefly about each one of them and talk a little bit more about technology because that is something which is very dear to my heart. No change of this type can happen without a deep societal engagement. And the fact that at PIC we are doing so much work in this area is actually creation of societal engagement. And we have seen if there is societal engagement is inadequate, how changes become extremely difficult. And we have seen the recent example of the farm laws reversal, etc. So I think critical part is how do we ensure that everyone everyone is deeply engaged. And so how do you get people involved in an effort of this time? See, because any change creates some winners and some losers. And I think that to me, the most important part is that how do we get a sense of community, a sense of common purpose. And that can only come if we know that, all of us here in this country or across the world will be severely impacted if we don't change. And I think the beginning of that change you see in a variety of ways. I think at an individual level, much action needs to be taken. And it's an action that we typically talk in terms of 3R, refuse, reuse, recycle. No, I think if we do this, we will spare the usage of excessive energy. We will spare the usage of excessive materials. And I think it can make for a cleaner, gentler, and better world. I can't ever forget Gandhiji's quote, which says that the world has enough for everybody's needs, but doesn't have enough for anybody's greed. And I think the way we are going about destroying nature and creating the climate problem is as if there is no tomorrow. So I think the societal engagement, deep involvement is very critical. The second level, and as I said, which is more dear to my heart, is this whole issue about technology. I have a firm belief that every problem can be solved if we have the necessary technology. Without technology, no problem can be solved. But technology alone cannot solve the problem. So what is the kind of technology that we need to look at? So if we were to see that we are really looking at the core thing that we are looking at is reduction of CO2 in the air. So obviously the least that we need to do is that we need to ensure, we need to ensure that we don't put more CO2 in the air. So maybe I think we should look at one aspect of that, and that is namely energy. So how do we generate energy, transmit energy, consume energy in such a way that there is no net increment to the CO2 in the atmosphere? And clearly this talks about renewable energy. And so when you talk of renewable energy, we are essentially talking about the energy that comes from sun, or that comes the way the sun is generating energy. So when we look at energy, we are obviously looking at solar or wind and the related renewable energy. Much work is being done in this area, and over the last decade, we can all see that the price of energy has really fallen precipitously when you are looking at any solar PV, etc. And I believe that this will continue to happen. So as newer and newer materials are brought into focus. Obviously, we will now look at materials like perovskite, where you can make flexible solar panels, so you can have them hanging on a building. You can make them light so that they can change in the morning and in the evening. So all of this is very doable, very possible. Obviously, since sun doesn't shine all the time and wind doesn't blow all the time, we can't have a situation where our continuous energy needs are met by the renewable energy that is happening. So there is necessarily a need for storage. And currently, we are talking about some types of storage more than others. Obviously, there is this whole big issue about pumped water storage, which can be highly promising. Then there are multiple types of batteries. Although lithium is really, should I say, the king of the kingdom, there are, of course, solid oxide batteries, there are iron oxide batteries, there are and multiple other batteries. As a company or a set of people who are very passionate about this area, we have been working on sodium-ion batteries, because sodium is available everywhere. Sodium is cheap. Sodium-ion batteries can be transported very easily. Sodium-ion is far more temperature resistant than lithium, and obviously it is cheaper. I think with that, we should be able to capture the energy that we get from renewable sources. The other area, which is also very dear to our heart, is this whole thing about hydrogen. And we must have all read about the hydrogen mission announcement yesterday. So the interesting thing is that hydrogen can be used as a temporary storage for all the renewable energy. Hydrogen can also be generated from the materials that we have around us. And we all know that there are different types of hydrogen. You can have hydrogen coming from fossil fuel, which is gray hydrogen, which has some merits, although it's not the best one. Or you can have blue hydrogen, where you get the hydrogen from fossil fuel, but capture the CO2, so it becomes blue. And the last one is, of course, green hydrogen, which you can make from stored solar, stored wind, or from biomass. Now, some of these solutions can be quite interesting. And I know, again, as a company passionately involved in this, we have been working on green hydrogen. And green hydrogen, of course, can come from solar and the electrolyzers. As we know, the cost of electrolyzers is dropping. As we know, the cost of solar PV cells is dropping, and therefore the cost of solar electricity is coming down. A big problem was that where you have enough sun, you may not have enough usage, and therefore you need to transport the energy from the place of generation of electricity to the place of consumption of hydrogen. And the transmission was a major issue. And all of you would have heard yesterday's announcement that the transmission costs are being brought down to zero, especially the ones which come from the interstate part. So that is a good way of looking at it. But associated with that, we need to figure out different ways of how do you store the hydrogen which you will make from the electricity that you will get from different places. Clearly, there is work to be done on hydrogen storage. Currently, hydrogen storage mechanism is not very energy efficient, and that is because we are still looking at very small volumes. The moment that we get much larger volumes, these large hydrogen storage, whether it is carbon composite or whether it is aluminum with carbon coating on that, all these costs will certainly come down. The other, and in our opinion, more important way of generating hydrogen is, of course, from biomass. India generates something like 200 million tons of bio-waste every year. Every major Indian city generates literally thousands of tons of bio-waste every day. And so that is a huge, huge potential for generation of hydrogen. And one can look at two different ways in which hydrogen can be generated from this. You can do either some kind of a burning, pyrolysis of this, from which you can generate hydrogen, or you can use microbes to generate hydrogen. Those types of bio-waste, which has either a lot of water in it or which has a lot of lignin in it, I think one can use pyrolysis. Those which have more cellulosic material can use microbes. And this is both these are extremely exciting areas of work. And here again, we have been working for a few years. We have actually just started running a pilot plant using pyrolysis. And we actually, a few months ago, announced a special microbe-based technology to generate hydrogen from cellulosic biomass, which is at least 30% cheaper than what you would see otherwise. Now, there is this whole new world of genetic engineering, and with the help of CRISPR, you can actually make changes in the genetic makeup of multiple microbes. And we see a phenomenal potential of using that technology to even further grow the generation of hydrogen from biomass. We believe that this will be a very important way of looking at things. We also believe that this can make additional incomes for our farmers. This can also mean decentralized generation of hydrogen. And this is the kind of hydrogen that can be used on huge mobility equipments like trucks and buses, etc., which are typically long distance as well as which are heavy, because that is not the area where a battery solution can be used. So we believe that there is a lot of potential. Moreover, now there is a very clearly felt need for usage of hydrogen in cement plants, in steel plants, in fertilizer plants. So a whole range of applications are available. And I believe that it should be possible to come to hydrogen, which is maybe $1 or $2 per kg. Once we get there, I think the benefits to us will be enormous. As I said, additional farmer income, less import of fuel from outside, clean cities, clean countryside. All of this will be major benefits. And I believe that we need to continue to work a lot in this area. If you look at the entire value chain of hydrogen, you have to look at generation, you have to look at transport and try to reduce it as much as you can. You need to look at storage, you need to look at dispensing, and you need to look at consumption. This is the value chain for hydrogen. And I believe that there is much work that can be done on that. We have also been working on the consumption end of hydrogen through the usage of fuel cells. So I think we need to plug each of these areas so that the cost delivered to the customer is really affordable. I believe we are at a stage where without any substantial state support, one can actually substitute fossil fuels by hydrogen. To us, that is something which can make a major impact from our perspective, from India's perspective. Now, I have talked about solar with batteries, solar with hydrogen, and pure hydrogen itself. But there is this bright star on the horizon that one sees, and that is this whole thing about desktop fusion. And there have been recent news items how various academic centers have been making significant progress in fusion. Now, we all know that the entire energy that we get is from sun, and which is really fusion. And there have been a lot of experiments as to how one can do fusion on a small scale. There are many benefits of that. One is that it will never be run away. You can always stop it at any time. Secondly, the effluents are non-toxic. And thirdly, desktop fusion is, of course, a little kind of a catchy slogan, but the reality is that you can make it in a much smaller way. Now, if we are going for something like that, then you are essentially looking at a future which will be absolute abundance of energy and absolute abundance of distributed energy, which can really change the world completely. And I, for one, I'm really looking forward to it, maybe a decade away or so. And that goes very well with Professor Amitabh Malik's call, saying that this decade, let's look at everything else so that by next decade, we have something like this coming in. In our opinion, the third lever for this model is actually the economic model. See, because no country in the world has public surplus capital. And so the demands on public capital are very high. So essentially, any solution that we come up with should be economically self-standing. And it should stand on its own feet at a reasonable scale. It will not stand on its own feet at a small scale, but it should be commercially beneficial at a larger scale. And fortunately, there is a lot of private capital slushing around across the world. And that is something that can be made available when you are looking at a ramp up of this. Now, when you do the ramp up, the scale is such that one can definitely come up with economically viable models for new energy. And we think that this will be the route that will be taken in many areas. We believe that ultimately private capital will make a big change here. Already, there are so many companies in the world who are willing to put in money for it. They are willing to put some extra money. There are a lot of green funds from which capital is available. As you know, most of the large PE firms and most of the large institutional investors have made commitments to green funds. And obviously, in the initial phases, there may be a bit of greenwashing, but clearly this is something that we will get over, and we will have genuine green funds available at really affordable prices. So this is really on the economic model. And the last model is public policy. And it is very heartening to see that over the last few years, from the Paris conference to the recent COP26, there has been a gradual change in the outlook of all the governments. And our government really is at the forefront of this. And if you look at the slew of initiatives that we have, whether it is FAME 1, FAME 2, whether it is a hydrogen policy, whether it's a policy for renewable energy, or whether it's the announcement for huge investments in solar, I think we are trending in the right direction. It is important that the public support comes in, but it is equally important that the public support is given very judiciously. As Dr. Vijay Kelkar quite often says, that the wheels of the private industry work quite well. Any extraneous influence is actually a destruction. So we have to do it very carefully, and we have to ensure that what we do doesn't actually decides the winners and the losers. It should decide the broad direction, and it should be agnostic to a particular technology or otherwise solution. And I think if we do that, we would see a good movement in this direction. So going back to main topic, I think this would be a decade of change. I personally feel that the last couple of centuries since the Industrial Revolution, we have not done justice to the world. I think the kind of economic policy that we have been following uses strong energy, destroys environment, and does not create income. So it's the lose, lose, lose. I believe that with the changes that are on the annual, we can certainly look forward to a kinder, gentler, and cleaner world. I personally believe that when something good is to be done, the whole world changes. Everybody's outlook changes, and I'm very happy to see a change in the outlook happening around us. I believe that over a period of time, this change in the outlook will percolate down to all layers of this society, and we will see some good years ahead. I want to again thank PIC and especially Professor Amitabh Malik to come up with a conference on this very, very important and topical subject. I'm certain that this will help the wheels turn faster. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ravi Pandit sir. You gave the audience a very nice introduction and overview of the challenge and the intensity of the challenge which we are facing and the urgency to act on it, and also covering all those cutting edge technologies and interesting economic and innovation aspects in your talk. We will now move on to the session 1 of the conference. So the session 1 is titled India's Challenges and Opportunities in this Decade, and it explores the biogeographic, economic, and development aspects of climate change and why India should be concerned about it. And we have a very dynamic panel for this session. The special talk on climate instability and economic uncertainties will be delivered by Professor Amitabh Malik. He is the convener of the conference, and he is a Padma Shri awardee who has worked in laser technology for many years. He is also a defense scientist who is actively working in energy, environment, and climate change field for almost 2 decades. He was a member of the National Security Advisory Board for 3 successive years and helped to shape the Government of India's energy and environment security approach. Professor Malik writes and speaks on national security, energy, and environment issues, as well as on impacts of future technology on the society. The next speaker is Dr. Roxy Matthew Call, who is a climate scientist at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. He has done his PhD in ocean atmospheric dynamics from Hokkaido University of Japan. He's currently leading research in climate change and how it extends. Excuse me. He's currently leading research on climate change and how it extends to the rapid warming in the Indo-Pacific region and impacts the global rainfall pattern, monsoon, and also the marine ecosystems. He's the chair of CLIVAR, Indian Ocean Region panel, and a lead author in the IPCC reports, which gauge the climate scenario in the global context. He has received a number of awards and honors, like being listed in the top 2% scientists ranked by Stanford University. I request our third speaker is Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. She is PhD in physics from University of Pune and has more than 20 years of experience in the sectors of decentralized waste to fuel technologies, household energy, sustainable urbanization, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. She runs her own green enterprise, Samuchit Envirotech, and is also the convener for Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change, INEC. In addition, she is serving on governing and advisory boards of several national and international organizations. Her work has been recognized by a number of awards and honors. We'll start with the special talk by Professor Amitabh Malik on climate instability and economic uncertainties. Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah. Just give me a minute.
Sir, sure.
Okay. Go full screen.
We can see it, your screen now.
Yeah. Go full screen.
Only it's
All
not full screen yet.
Okay. Let me begin by extending a warm welcome to all. Being the convener of the conference, it is my pleasant duty to welcome you all. And of course, to thank Mr. Ravi Pandit, one of our own technology leaders, to give a wonderful keynote address, giving the promise of technology that is there, provided we manage our affairs within this century. So my opening slide is the Earth. Half of it is above the ground, half of it is below the ground. That environment, Earth environment, has been very well balanced for millions of years. And we have had a very stable environment, Earth environment, which we benefited from. Now, anthropogenic activities have seriously disturbed that balance. And that is why we are at a stage where our whole stability, our whole progress, our whole, whether it is economy, whether it is environment, whether it is livelihood, everything is under threat. So my talk is going to be climate instability and economic uncertainty. So climate instability I'm talking about is why, how, and where are we going? I'm now just about turning 80, and if I take my generation as the past, in the last 70 years, world population has jumped from 2.5 billion to 7.7 billion, more than 3 times. At the same time, the energy consumption has increased 45 times, which is huge. And of course, if you look at the nature, global wildlife has reduced by 53%. Obviously, it is because of the compromise of their habitat, and therefore the loss of the forest cover and the natural environment. Most of the energy that humanity has progressed on comes from the fossil fuel, emitting CO2 and other greenhouse gases. But even if we just look at the CO2 concentration in atmosphere, pre-industrial level was about 280 ppm, and now we are already at 415 ppm. It is increasing roughly at about 2 ppm per year, which means unless we check the emissions, we are edging towards 450 and 500, and you can easily understand what the average temperature would be. Fortunately, the greenhouse gases have been very helpful in stabilizing the atmosphere at an average 15 degrees centigrade. Obviously, some places are more hotter than, and some places are colder, but that is what has provided the humanity to progress. And global warming and climate changes, unfortunately, are very slow and cumulative process. So it has been happening for 100, 200 years, but it is now that it's staring us in the face. We are seeing devastating effects that now the overall public has woken up, and as our keynote speaker said, there's a lot of awareness increasing and so many things are happening. Average 1% rise in atmosphere and oceans means some parts are already more hotter, as I said. Hence, all upper atmospheric currents, what we call jet streams, and oceanic flows, they are also temperature dependent. They have all been disturbed, and that's the effect we are seeing, causing extreme weather events, sudden higher precipitation, heat waves, droughts, and bushfires, and so on and so forth. Cyclonic patterns have changed in increasing as well as intensity. Devastation due to climatic instability are already evident and bound to increase unless we drastically reduce it. In fact, since all this is cumulative and it's there already in the atmosphere, even if we stop dead today, next 10 years are going to see some hysteresis effect. Well, it's not something new. UNFCCC, the Framework for Climate Change Control, was established in 78. Kyoto Protocol was signed in 92. Then, of course, we had the Paris Agreement. But despite all the global focus and promises, very little is changing as yet because our emissions are still increasing. The IPCC report 21, as we all know, has waved the red flag that unless we drastically reduce emission within the next 8-10 years, this decade, we will be hurting not only livelihood, but also economy. So then we are looking at what is the importance of this decade? Why are we calling it the decade of change? Unless serious and coordinated global efforts are taken, in the next 10 years, several regenerative actions will take place. They are called the tipping points, where the nature takes over and the human control will be much less effective. For instance, melting of ice sheets in Greenland, and they are exposing the permafrost areas that will start emitting methane gas, which is almost 28 times more potent for for global warming. Similarly, huge ice shelves melting at Antarctica, that's a landmass, and if the ice shelves melt and fall in the sea level rise will be affecting everybody else. Exploitation of forest for business, for money gains, has already reduced the green cover by 15 to 20%. And of course, now we have forest fires that are damaging national sequestration capacities. The Amazon rainforest, best known as a carbon sink, people are now wondering whether it's slowly going to get into a carbon emitting area. Economic recovery from losses due to pandemic. World is already seen the effect. Well, as Ravi Pandit said, every challenge is an opportunity. And this is the opportunity for us to understand that the so-called recovery that we are talking about today from the pandemic losses is a unique opportunity to go for the development of environmentally green development. But unfortunately, that's not yet happening. To give an example, what we call an Earth Overshoot Day, which marks on which day we have exhausted the year's quota of natural resources, that has come down to 27 July last year, 21, which means we are borrowing from the future generations, and in a way, at a rate that cannot be compensated. So unfortunately, I have to paint this gloomy picture because that's where we are. Well, the economics is a mechanism where wealth creation is designed on predictable parameters. All economic planning includes foreseeable risks to growth and progress. Climate instability now constitutes the largest unpredictable risk. So much so that World Economic Forum has analyzed that every US dollar invested in climate mitigation action today could account for almost 5 times as much benefit in the next 10 years. World today is going through several unknowns. We have the climate change, of course. Then we have the technological evolution, the robotics, the AI, and so on and so forth. We have the zoonotic diseases that are spreading more because of the higher temperature. So economy has suffered on multiple counts for all these unpredictable reasons, and humanity is already seeing that how the economy takes a backseat when human livelihood is at stake. Economists are already sensing the dangers, and several alternatives are evolving to progress with an alternative, with an economic model that will work within the planetary boundaries. One example, of course, is the donut economy that was proposed by Kate Raworth. Another point that is relevant is a carbon tax. Currently, it is in the range of $30 to $60, but that is to compensate for the damages that are caused by the global warming that has already happened. And as we progress ahead, I think these things are going to go on increasing. I would say that these are pragmatic economic measures to effectively reduce CO2 emissions, because once you put a price to it, then there is a different way of looking at it. So there is actually a social cost of carbon emission. Economists have evolved government policies who evolve government policies talk of the social cost of carbon, a warming Earth due to the mainly CO2 emissions from fossil fuel burning. It is the cost of economic damages due to global warming, and damages estimated in different countries is divided by the emissions to calculate the cost per metric ton. And of course, famous economist Dr. William Nordhaus in 2018 was given Nobel Prize for actually quantifying it and measuring it. Like in economics, they say there are no free lunches. So far, I think mankind has been having free lunches. Now it's trying to pay. Although yet to be strictly enforced as a carbon tax, economists are already factoring the social cost of carbon in their profit loss calculations in the annual budget process. Estimating economic losses due to every 1 degree centigrade rise is now a standard practice, and all those who emit emission will be responsible for their share of payment. At a rough calculation, right now it has been accepted that every degree centigrade rise corresponds to 48 euro per degree, and the overall economic damage all across the world could go into trillions. This is perhaps the direct linkage of economy with a measurable environmental degradation. And although the actual cost of energy may be higher, and as this becomes measurable, the social cost of carbon may also increase eventually. US, China, India are the top carbon emitting countries who will face the biggest economic losses. India's cost of carbon emission was estimated to be about $86 per ton. And therefore, for every extra ton that we are emitting, we are paying that cost. And so the important thing is that this is one mechanism that the revenue that can be generated from this kind of a tax can be used for transition to green energy. And then, of course, because the green energy will have very small social cost of carbon. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation, where I'm asking for a radical change in understanding that economy is a subset of society, which by itself is a subset of the Earth environment. Whereas earlier, if you see the left diagram, the economy was the larger force, larger focus, and environment and society were smaller focus. Then we came to almost equitable understanding of equitable share. And finally, we are understanding that environment is the largest contributor. So going forward, if I may call it way forward, way ahead, to avoid for future disruptions, new economies must become distributive and work towards spreading the benefits of progress to many, thus reducing inequality. It's a social issue, but again, if we do not reduce inequality, then the antisocial elements will always take advantage of it. This can reduce the potential dangers of escalating social tensions. As I said, knowledge, power, and wealth can be more distributed if our technology and institutions become more participative in this globally interdependent world that we have seen. Now, no country is an island, and therefore everybody affects everybody else. Instead of fossil fuel dependence and mass manufacture of the 20th century, we now have many other options. We have the renewable energy power, we have the digital platforms, we have the 3D printing, just to give you some example. So I'm saying all future designs must focus on high resilience for the real sustainability. Sustainability is a much maligned word, but we are now coming to a stage where sustainability must become the actual mantra. Only then we can focus on thriving within the social and ecological boundaries and unleash the creativity of the real qualitative upgrade to life. So ultimately, I'm saying whatever we do in future must be oriented towards qualitative improvement of our human livelihood. So it is time to unshackle the old dogmas and bring in all ingenuity to design the future. So the future needs to be designed within this decade, so that what we do after this decade will be all contributive, constructive, and inclusive. And that is a challenge. I think I'll end here because there are many speakers speaking on various other aspects, and at the end of the conference we'll have all the information put together. So let me end here. Thank you. Aditi, back to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that comprehensive talk and talking about the interconnectedness of environment, economy, and society, and the interactions which they have with each other, and the tremendous challenge which rise in front of humanity. And I also like the idea which you shared about shifting focus with the environment being the overarching focus rather than environment, economy, or society. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Dr. Roxy Matthew Call, who is a climate scientist and will talk about understanding India's climate vulnerabilities. Over to you, Dr. Call.
Thanks, Aditi. I'm trying to share my screen.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, it's visible, right?
Yes, it is visible.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks Aditi for a warm welcome, and thanks to all the organizers and the panelists for coming together on such a important discussion. So here, my objective is to put together the challenges that India is facing, and many of these challenges can look like huge, overwhelming, depressing. When I put the numbers, in fact, I work as a climate scientist here, and I've been working on these numbers for quite a long time. And whenever I see the numbers, it can be depressing. But I try to view it as in a clinical way, and also try to look into solutions. So here in this talk, I'm not running into solutions, but identifying these challenges and also looking at the numbers and the extent and the area and the magnanimity of these extreme weather events due to climate change. They give us an idea on how to face them. And there are occasions when many of these extremes work together. We call them compound events. So let's take a ride through the climate challenges or vulnerabilities that India is already facing due to that 1 degree Celsius change that has happened since the pre-industrial time. So here, this image here looks a bit alarming. It shows far away the hills are there. In one side, the sea is there. And everything is changing. The atmosphere is changing. The hills are changing. The sea is changing, and the city is facing a dark scenario. And if you look at India as a whole, you can see a small map of India here. We have to the north, we have the Himalayas. In fact, over the Western Ghats also, we have the hills and mountains. And on all three sides, we have the Indian Ocean covering all three sides, right? And all these elements, the mountains and the oceans are changing, and at a rapid pace. In fact, our research shows that, and this is what has been identified by the recent IPCC climate report as well. Indian Ocean is the fastest warming ocean among all other tropical oceans. Yeah. So, and in fact, by climatologically itself, Indian Ocean is the warmest waters. So the warmest waters are warming at the fastest rate. And we know that through climate change is the oceans that are absorbing most of this heat. So the previous speakers, Professor Malik talked about, Malik and Ravi Pandit talked about how much ppm of carbon dioxide has been going out and how many gigatons, right? So it's absorbing all the solar energy, and 93% of this additional heat from global warming is going to the oceans. And we see a response of that over India, the Indian subcontinent, which is covered on three sides by the Indian Ocean. And the Himalayas are also facing rapid change. The glaciers are melting. So let us look into some of these changes that we are facing in this region. Much of these extreme weather events due to climate change are similar for the South Asian region or the Indian Ocean region that I call. So one of the set of extremes are the monsoon-related extremes. Now, I will go into some of these extremes one by one in my talk. And definitely across South Asia, the floods have increased, rapid increase. In fact, over the Indian subcontinent, there is a threefold rise in widespread extreme rainfall events causing floods. And this has been a consistent phenomena, rising phenomena for the last several decades since the 1950s. And there is also, at the same time, when the heavy rainfall events are increasing, the total amount of rainfall that we receive during the monsoon season, the total amount of rainfall, that is decreasing at a gradual pace over some regions like the central India and North India and some parts of Western Ghats. So this leads to frequent droughts as well. And we can see similar events happening over some other regions as well. And associated with these changes, there are other changes in biodiversity. We saw locust swarms happening over Africa, which in fact got carried over the monsoon winds, the winds and the moisture-laden winds to Arabian Peninsula, to Indo-Pak region, and ultimately reaching the Indian continent as well. So these elements of climate change are interacting in multiple different ways, in ways we don't even imagine, and reaching us on our doorsteps, affecting our water security, our food security, energy security, and all. And then we have one of my favorite topics, cyclones. In fact, just 1 hour back, one of my PhD students defended his work on cyclones and in a rapidly changing Indian Ocean. So we show that the cyclones are changing over the North Indian Ocean, and the way they are approaching India is also changing. And cyclones release these storm surges or huge waves which splash on our coastline and impact the coastal zone. So, and we know the other impacts due to cyclones. Cyclones are now bringing more rains than ever. That is another impact. And we also have heat waves, mostly towards the Indo-Pak region, northwestern region, and encroaching to some parts of India. Terrestrial heat waves. Now, like terrestrial heat waves, there are heat waves in the ocean also. In fact, if you just Google marine heat waves over the Indian Ocean, you can see some of the recent studies from our group. First comprehensive study looking into heat waves in the Indian Ocean. Now, we have heard about terrestrial heat waves, but what about marine heat waves? These are also heat waves like land heat waves, but They are not just in the surface, they goes into the subsurface as well, results in coral bleaching, and also affects the marine biodiversity and marine ecosystem, and ultimately the fisheries also. Now, we don't know much about the impact on fisheries on our coastline. It has been shown that the marine heat waves impact fisheries in Korea and other regions. So we have a severe lack of data on how many of these extremes are interacting with our ecosystem and our food security as well. Now, there are other impacts also of a rapidly warming ocean. One is the declining marine phytoplankton. Now, marine phytoplankton are these microscopic plants which support the entire life. Even the oxygen that you breathe right now, 50% of that oxygen is from the marine phytoplankton, released by the marine phytoplankton several million years ago. And they form the base of the food chain, again coming back to the food security. So there are all these kind of impacts, and overarching impact there is the sea level rise. Now, sea level rise is rising across these regions, and particularly along our coastlines also. In fact, an island, a small island called Wan Island in southern Bay of Bengal near Gulf of Mannar, is vanishing. So that is the telltale sign of global warming and sea level rise, sinking our own regions, which are under the Indian territory. Now, parts of northern Bay of Bengal also have a drastically fast sea level rise, which could affect the food, water security, and even the health, because the hygiene over this region is dependent on the saltwater intrusion and many other factors. Now, I will get into one or two of these factors and how they work together, challenging the climate and the security over India. Now, one of the most interesting and challenging aspect or extreme weather event are the cyclones, obviously. And just last year, we had back-to-back cyclones just before the monsoon, right? And usually just before the monsoon onset, it is not a favorable condition for cyclones to form because the monsoon prevents the cyclone to form vertically. But we had these back-to-back cyclones that time. And one of the reasons is the additionally available heat and moisture from these oceans to support these huge systems. Cyclone Tote was an extremely severe cyclone of maximum intensity of 220 km/h. You can imagine the speed by comparing it with the speed at which you drive your car in the city, maybe 40 km/h, 60 km/h, or around that. So this is like huge. And we had on the East Coast also, we had a cyclone, Yash cyclone, 110 km/h. I'm comparing this because I have a short video in one of the slides where I show how these cyclones manifested in a different way, despite being of different intensities. Now, some of our studies shows that as the Arabian Sea warms, one of the fastest warming in the Indian Ocean is in the Arabian Sea. And this has gone up to 1.2 degrees Celsius to 1.4 degrees Celsius in the Arabian Sea. That is compared to a 0.9 to 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise. So as the temperature rises in the Arabian Sea, the number and intensity of cyclones, and also the heavy rains also increase. Now, what is that number? Over the Arabian Sea, this is, there are two figures here, one on the left and one on the right. These are in different decades. The early decades from 1980s to 2000 shows a number of cyclones during the pre-monsoon and the post-monsoon. Similarly, the recent two decades. So the last 4 decades, during the last 4 decades, we can see the Arabian Sea cyclones have increased by 52%. If you count the number of cyclones here in these previous decades and the recent decades, there is a 52% increase in the number of cyclones. Bay of Bengal has been steady, more or less steady. Generally, it used to have many number of cyclones, but there is an 8% decrease. But at the same time, there is a slight increase in the intensity of cyclones. Now, coming back to the Arabian Sea, there are more changes because of the rapid warming here. The number of, among these cyclones, the number of very severe cyclones have increased by 150%. And not only the number, the duration. So many of these cyclones are spending more time over the ocean than ever. So that means it can straddle the coast and move like Cyclone Tote started from Lakshadweep to Kerala. It's touched all the states along the west coast before landfall over Gujarat, right? So this duration has increased by 80%. The intensity of cyclones also show increase, significant increase, 20 to 40%. So this is all from the data from IMD and satellites, and all this data is on our face. And models also clearly show that this is due to the warming in the oceans, ultimately due to climate change. Now with cyclones, I told that we have huge waves and storm surges. These are the storm surges that happen during Cyclone Tote, just to have an idea. So generally, the winds cause waves of less than 1 meter or 1 meter height or so. But during cyclones, you can see the wave height goes up to 6 meters. So along the coast, this means a lot of water splashed over the coastline, flooding the region. You can see near Mumbai also. Now, some estimates at some locations, these are from buoys in the Arabian Sea. Now we need more observations. We don't have much of these buoys measuring data. That's one thing that deter from us from understanding the change and also make precautions to address these impacts. Yeah. So some buoys shows that there are waves up to the height of 9 or 10 meters. And just think of it happening over low-lying lands over Mumbai coast. I will show you a picture later, and you can think how it will be. So now coming to other extremes, I told that the extremes are increasing, and over India there is a threefold increase in widespread extremes causing floods. Now this you can see a map of India, and the colors, the warm colors or the red or yellow orange colors shows the regions where the widespread extreme rains above 150 millimeter per day are increasing. And the blue colors show where it is decreasing, and neutral colors show not much change. And you can see across central India, and this is why like this. So this is that path of where the monsoon acts. So this is for June to September, where the southwest or the summer monsoon acts. You can see across the entire path of the monsoon, because monsoon is showing more fluctuations than ever, more variability, it is causing that short spells of heavy rains. So even though the total rains are decreasing, the total rains during the season are decreasing, there are occasions like a few days during the season when the atmosphere is full of water. And one of the important factor, this is the physics that we all should remember. Warmer air holds more moisture than cooler air. So warmer air holds more moisture and for a longer time. So it doesn't rain for a long time, but when it rains bountiful. So that is what you are seeing in most of these regions in central India, parts of Western Ghats. And you can see this part of Maharashtra close to Mumbai, and where Mahabaleshwar and all that confluence is there. West central in the Western Ghats region. This is where we had the recent heavy rains. Now, this is the data for the last 70 years from 1950 to 2020, and the change in extreme rainfall events. So this region specifically shows that rise in extreme weather events, and other parts of Western Ghats as well, from Kerala, some parts of central Kerala, parts of Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, central India, northeast India, including Assam, where again we see extreme rainfall events very often. So there are occasions when these events act together, like when cyclones bring more extreme rains because the atmosphere can hold more moisture than ever. Now, these short videos I'm showing between Cyclone Tote and Cyclone Yas. This was along the coast of Kerala. You can see that storm surges pushing water. And some regions, if it is a low-lying land, this can go into several kilometers. That's what you would see with Cyclone Yash. And occasionally, these cyclones will, you can see that it's all cloudy, right? So the cyclones bring heavy rains as well. So now this is on the Odisha coast, Cyclone Yash. If you remember the early picture, Cyclone Yash was half the intensity of Cyclone Tote, but the impacts were much more larger. And we thought the east coast of India was much prepared, but the impact due to climate change was much more large scale. That, you know, the loss was huge, the agriculture loss and property loss. And the reason is that many of those events compounded one on each other. So there was storm surge due to cyclones. Over that, we had the rainwater due to cyclones, added with the pinch of sea level rise due to climate change. And one of the reasons for me to particularly tell is that the North Bay of Bengal, that is one of the regions where the sea level rise is much more than the other regions. And unfortunately, the east coast of India was, at that time when the cyclone occurred, there was a high tide also. Now this is a natural event, but along with other events, it multiplied or aggravated the impact of this compound flood, and it went several kilometers ahead. So there are all these kind of overlapping events. Now, what is the problem that we face? We approach each event separately. There are scientists who study rains separately. There are scientists who study cyclones separately, and we have the statistics for each of them. There are people who study on sea level rise. That is a separate study, but we need to have an integrated approach. So we need to have data for that integrated approach. We need departments to work together, and we need forecasts also to have that integrated approach. Now, if that was a picture from the coastline, we have a picture from the interior Maharashtra also. Now, one fine day, we were amazed with this sudden spurt of heavy rains over Mahabaleshwar. So this is a part of Western Ghats in Maharashtra. And we have only scanty observations over these hilly regions. And one of our stations showed on 19th around 100 millimeter, 1 to 3 days, 100, 150. And then suddenly on 22nd July, 480 millimeters of rain. And 23rd July, 600 millimeters of rain. That is like in just 2 days, 22 and 23, more than 1,000 liters of rain per square meter. Yeah, that's a huge amount of rain for a whole area. Other regions, I heard that Citizen Science Network and their stations showed much higher values for other regions. So these rains released a lot of water into these rivers, which flooded townships like Chiplum. It was all over the news. Now, what happened and how was this compounded? The sea level rise from the Arabian Sea, and again there was a high tide in by the coast, that resulted in a slow flushing out of this water. So the floods remain in this region for a longer time. Now, we are talking about climate change and all, and it's easy to blame on climate change for everything. Of course, heavy rains where there, sea level rise was there, but were there other factors also? Obviously, there are factors like how we use the land and how that interacts with the climate change elements. One is the river encroachment. This is just one of the examples where we squeeze the river and the river floods out. Here is a schematic of that. So which points out that the climate change is not the only culprit that we should see. We need to have an integrated approach on other direct human interventions also. So generally rivers meander, and when the rains happen, heavy rains happen, they have these floodplains, muddy swamps and floodplains and beaches where it can spread out and gradually sink in, absorb the water getting absorbed. But if that space is encroached and the meander is lost, then, and we build the houses around it, the rivers won't listen to you. When heavy rains happen, extreme heavy rains because of climate change, all the surrounding areas get flooded quite fast because there are no floodplains to sink. Yeah, so it is quite easy to blame, put the blame entirely on climate change, but in many cases, that's not the only case. Yeah, we need to work on our local factors. So many times, though climate change is global, the impacts are always local, and some of the actions are also local. Some of the actions and solutions are also local in terms of adaptation, in terms of preparing the land and property. We need to disaster-proof our land, our rivers, and our public infrastructure for these changes that we are seeing. Again, another picture. Now, this is a famous picture from an aerial picture of Mumbai. You can see the haves and the have-nots. These blue colors look pretty, but these are tarpaulin roofs. They don't have proper roofs over here near the high-rise buildings. So when we have heavy rains, and heavy rains from the top and flooding from the bottom, it can be due to the sea or due to the rains and due to the cyclones. We don't know if it is the roof that's getting thrown out first, or if it is the floor getting washed out first, right? So it's a situation like that. And at the same time, we see how the city has changed. Can you spot a river here? We in fact had the Miti River going in through the middle of, supposed to be in the middle of this picture. So that has been heavily encroached. It is less than a nala now, so it cannot take the additional water from the city. So now this is an example of Mumbai, but represents cities across the globe, not just India or South Asia. Yeah. So these are situations which we need to rethink. We might need to redesign our cities to approach these situations. Yeah, and these are places where we used to have a lot of mangroves which could absorb the cyclones and the heavy rains. They are the lungs of the city. They are not existent anymore. So we can, I told you I'll be talking about challenges, but I cannot leave this stage without talking a bit of solutions, 1 or 2 solutions, and then I'm off. So the IPCC reports give some potential solutions or best practices as well. It shows how with the sea level rise and other coastal impacts, we can approach it. So there are many solutions on protecting it or retreating from the coastline, but it always shows the ecosystem-based adaptation, probably a mix of ecosystem and artificial adaptation as the best choice for fighting climate change. And that is one point. And I have seen that a collective effort is required. Of course, we need innovation and all for mitigating climate change. At the same time, we need better observations. Like I told you the story of Mahabaleshwar, but there are many locations over the hills, and even within the cities, there is a large variability, spatial regional variability in terms of rainfall. So we need high resolution observations, and we need to work on improving these observations, forecast, and research at the same time. And we need to connect it with the local administration. We need to network between departments because multiple extremes and ecosystems are working with each other. And there are occasions when national agencies like IMD and others cannot reach all these regions. That's where a collective effort from citizens can also help. I have been working with citizen science networks like Saturk in Maharashtra, and also the Miniature River campaign in Kerala. So these networks have helped a lot in installing rain cages and other river sensors, and also educating the public as well. So all these efforts, collective efforts together, can help us to look forward to a climate resilient future. And that's what I'm also looking forward to amidst all this potentially depressing news. And one more thing, the story doesn't end here. The changes that I showed, the pictures that I showed, are the resultant of a 1 degree Celsius change. Now, and I told you that over the Indian Ocean, it has gone up to 1.2, 1.4 degrees Celsius. Now, by 2050, this is going to be 2 degrees Celsius or 2.5 degrees Celsius. And by end of century, it will be 3.8 degrees Celsius. That's what our projections show. And if I give the example of Mumbai, yeah, if I give the example of Mumbai, the population of Mumbai is currently around 20 million. Yeah. So in 2020, 20 million. By 2050, it is projected to increase up to 40 million, maybe, potentially. And there are studies showing there is a lot of domestic migration, especially from other climate challenged regions like UP, Uttarakhand, the Himalayan foothills, where there are other kind of climate challenges. So people are, and the agriculture there are again facing these issues. So the people from there are migrating to the mega cities, which is facing a different kind of challenge. So these coastal cities are now seeing a huge population explosion, and with the future temperatures rising, future extremes increasing, if you are planning something for the future, if you are redesigning the cities for the future, we need to consider these challenges of the future, not just the past. We can't just think about floods in the past. We should think about floods in the future, the cyclones in the future, and also the population. You can imagine it will be a Mumbai on top of the current Mumbai, yeah, by 2050. So what do we do? If we make coastal highways or other infrastructure, it has to last the next 50 or 100 years, right? So we need to be futuristic. We need to disaster-proof this. So that is the message that I have. And thanks for this very stimulating discussion. And I'm happy to have questions as well at some point. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cole, for that very elaborate and graphic in real sense presentation, because it brought out the real urgency and the state of Indian Ocean and the numbers which we hear, but actually what impact they are having, and also looking at it in a holistic perspective and not just climate change.
Exactly.
We will come to the questions after the last talk by Dr. Priyadarshini Karve on role of cities for climate action. Just to inform the audience, our fourth speaker unfortunately could not join us today, Ms. Aparna Roy, due to some medical emergencies. But we will now look into the role of cities, and I invite Dr. Priyadarshini Karve to give her talk.
Thanks, Aditi. I hope I am audible. My connection is a bit unstable.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see the presentation.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about role of cities in climate action, and in a way, I'll take off from where Dr. Roxy stopped. Cities have an interesting role in the overall climate change challenge that we are facing today. They are the main cause, at least as far as the developing world is concerned, because we have been doing carbon footprinting, personal carbon footprinting of individuals, and consistently we see that urban citizens have carbon footprint than our national average, which means that bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from cities. The reason our average is low because we still have majority of people living in rural areas where the greenhouse gas emissions are relatively less. So if you look at the total emissions coming from India, and that's the story of all the developing countries, especially India and China, the epicenters of greenhouse gas emissions are the urban spaces. And this is pretty obvious because the urban infrastructure is high material and energy intensive, both in constructing it, in using it, And as the cities are transforming and evolving, we are also demolishing a lot of old infrastructure and rebuilding. So that demolition process is also adding to the overall greenhouse gas emissions. And the city lifestyle, the urban lifestyle in itself is also high material and energy consumption based. So it's a combined factor of the infrastructure and people and their aspirations, which make cities the epicenter of greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, as Dr. Roxy also said before me, cities are increasingly victims of climate change. And this is particularly evident in the case of India. India, in fact, as a country, faces this very unique challenge that we are among the top 5 emitters of greenhouse gases, and we are also among the top 5 countries which are going to be hit the hardest by climate change. And again, that story is also to an extent unfolding in the cities. And as Roxy very graphically showed, short-sighted urban planning, high population density, and local climate change impacts. These three are coming together, and this has become a recipe for disasters, which is leading to loss of life, loss of livelihoods, and overall damage to infrastructure. This is also a scenario that is increasingly happening in the cities. So on this background, can cities be part of a solution? And I'm saying a solution here because climate change being a multi-dimensional challenge, there isn't going to be a single silver bullet solution. There will be multiple solutions, and somewhere cities will have to come to the forefront and play a major role there. I believe that we need to actually work on two fronts for cities from becoming from where they are currently, where they are cause and victims, to transforming them to becoming a solution. One aspect is that the entire urban planning, I think this entire sector has to go back to the drawing board and rethink the principles of urban planning. We need low carbon or carbon neutral infrastructure, and we also need climate resilient infrastructure. The carbon neutrality part is getting talked about a lot nowadays, but we also have to be equally concerned about and give equal priority to climate resilience. And in order to support this transformation, we of course need climate literate and responsible citizens. Um, uh, Dr. Ravi Pandit talked about personal responsibility, but I believe that it is the policy and the businesses which have to lead. And people will then follow. We can't keep on saying that it is the people who have to lead anymore, because there is only so much that individuals can do. Just to give an example, even if I want to stop using my personal vehicle, in order to be able to do that without affecting my professional and personal life, I need my city to provide me with walkable, cyclable roads with good public transport system. Then and only then I'm going to be able to act on that intention. And therefore these two things have to go hand in hand. Policymakers and businesses will have to start showing the way, because that is what often shapes public opinion. And especially smart policies can really go a long way in making that happen. So that is why I am putting the infrastructure part first and the citizens part second in this list here. As far as going low carbon and carbon neutral is concerned, I think there are also, while this is getting talked about a lot and that's a welcome sign, I'm not sure that really people are thinking this through. And we see a lot of action happening in a haphazard manner. Actually, this has to systematically follow a 3-step formula. The first step is optimizing how much energy do we really need. And to do that, we have to follow the principle of sufficiency. Sufficiency is that you use highly efficient technology, but you also use it only to the extent of meeting needs. Many times what happens is when efficient technology comes online, people become careless about use of energy. LED lighting is a very good example of that. Because LED lighting reduces electricity consumption, now if you go to any commercial space, marketplaces, you find that it is Diwali all year round. So the total electricity consumption hasn't really gone down that much. What we need to focus on is not just therefore to bring in efficient technologies, but also to ensure that we focus on fulfilling needs so that overall the energy consumption actually goes down. And this is true not just for energy, but also for materials. Once we do that, we will get a real sense of how much energy do we actually need to provide good quality of life for citizens, to provide sufficient energy for businesses to operate in a profitable manner, and so on and so forth. Then we can think about transitioning. And this transitioning, again, not just for energy, but also for materials. Fossil fuels to renewables, and from non-recyclables to recyclable materials. Basically, we need to have a circular material economy, which is driven by renewable energy sources. That is the transition that we are looking at. And once we figure out how much energy do we actually need, actually that transition will be easier. Once we do all of this, we will know exactly how much emissions are still happening from the urban spaces. And then that gives us a better idea of how much carbon sinks do we actually need, how much carbon sequestration is needed to reach carbon neutrality. In fact, I'm sure that even with the current technologies that are available, keep apart the promising technologies that are in the pipeline, even with the technologies that are here and now, if we follow this path scientifically and logically, we will not only get to carbon neutrality, but we will start getting to carbon negativity, which goes beyond carbon neutrality. I'm just going to touch upon a couple of points where I feel that the path that is currently popular is not the right path. Cities can go at least partially off grid, but that is not going to happen by saying that instead of taking the electricity from a coal-fired power plant, I'll take it from some mega scale solar farm. Firstly, that kind of a system doesn't exist in India, and cities don't have a choice of deciding where they get electricity from. But if we take the decentralized route, if all the rooftops are used for solar energy harvesting, both by photovoltaics as well as for thermal, and with wind energy wherever possible acting as a backup, we can actually power the buildings by using the rooftops in the city. That mobility can also reduce its dependence on petroleum fuels by focusing on walking, cycling, and public transport, and solar powered electric vehicles. That's the route that we have to take. And again, here, the first part, the walking, cycling, public transport has to take priority. Today, we see a lot of policies coming in favor of electric vehicles, but that alone is not going to address this problem. Unless we reduce the total number of vehicles in the city, we are not going to be able to actually get the emissions down in a meaningful way. And even for thermal needs, this is one area, because typically the renewable energy conversation revolves around electricity. But we also use energy in the form of heat in a variety of applications. And we do have solutions already available to us in the form of biogas, solar, and direct use of biomass for thermal needs. But in all of this, I believe decentralization is the key, especially the last part of thermal needs, which is particularly the area in which I have been working. Any type of organic waste can be converted into a clean, usable fuel. But the energy balance and the carbon balance has to work out. And that happens if the waste is not transported. Because if you are transporting waste to a factory where it is getting converted into something, you are burning a lot of diesel to make some fuel. So there often the energy balance actually becomes unfavorable. So converting the waste where it is available into a fuel and using it at that location itself for meeting a thermal need is a better approach to take than the centralized processing of organic waste into any kind of fuel. So here also decentralization has to be the key. We have to realize that the current energy system that we are using has been designed for the strengths of fossil fuels. Now, if we want to make the transformation, it cannot be remove this and replace that at the energy generation point. It has to be a total transformation of the entire energy system, and we need to rebuild it to suit the strengths of the renewable energy sources. And that is where decentralization, I think, is going to play a key role. These are just some photographs of some of the work that we ourselves have been doing in the thermal energy sector, particularly for cooking. What you see on this side, there are several biomass fueled cooking energy devices that we have developed, both for rural and urban kitchens. And we are collaborating with others who are promoting a number of exciting, interesting solar cooking options. There is a possibility of converting food waste into biogas even in an urban setting, and using it in the kitchen in urban kitchens. It's important to realize that when we are talking about transitioning ultimately in this century to a fossil fuel free future, we cannot say that LPG or PNG is the last destination for our kitchens. Our kitchens also have to move to renewable energy sources, both in rural and urban areas. And that is the focus of some of our work. So we are focusing on making net zero kitchens at household level, at institutional level, at commercial level. And it is definitely possible. Technologies are now available to make that happen. Coming to the issue of carbon sinks, we do need to improve upon natural carbon sinks. And here, because of the topic given to me, I'm restricting myself to talk about our cities. Urban areas are surrounded by natural ecosystems. And cities like Pune, for example, are lucky that we have natural ecosystems within the city. We have the hills and we have the rivers. Now, there seems to be a particular school of thinking which is moving in this direction that let's plant millions and billions of trees everywhere that we can find space, and that will give us the carbon sink that we require. But that, I feel, is a totally nonsensical approach. What we need is to restore our available natural ecosystems to a form that that is as close to their natural form as possible. Healthy natural ecosystems will be the best carbon sinks that we can possibly have. And that is the reason why many of us who work in the climate change sector are standing today in opposition of the riverfront development project by the Pune Municipal Corporation. Not only is it increasing the risk of flooding, etc., but it will actually be a lost opportunity for creating a tremendous carbon sink in the middle of our city in the form of a naturally flowing river and naturally vegetated river banks. So that is another angle to this whole riverfront development discussion that has to be brought to the forefront. When it comes to human-made carbon sinks, there also people are now talking about technologies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to install and another millions of dollars per year to implement. which also is, according to me, not necessary. We already have the world's cheapest technology for carbon capture and sequestration, and that is converting any type of agricultural waste, garden waste, forestry waste, which has less than 10% moisture, just convert it into charcoal or biochar, put it in the soil. When biomass decomposes, all the carbon in it goes into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. When you convert it into charcoal, you are harvesting 30% of the carbon as elemental, inert, non-reactive carbon. So if you put it in the soil, it's just going to stay there for thousands of years. And that's the best possible carbon capture that you can have, because adding biochar to soil also improves the quality of the soil, the fertility of the soil. So that is an added bonus there. We have a very, very simple technology which people can implement even in their backyard to convert their garden waste into biochar and start contributing to carbon capture and sequestration right in their homes. The other aspect of it, as I said, that cities also should become climate resilient. Cities also should become climate resilient. And for that, we really lack the granular micro level data right now. We started doing this to an extent in Pune. We started collecting and assessing climate vulnerability at municipal ward levels in 2019. But last couple of years, because of the pandemic, we couldn't do much around that. But we have started in a small way, and I take this opportunity to invite young people to join us in doing this legwork. We really need, at a city level, you take municipal ward as a unit or even a smaller unit, we need community level climate vulnerability assessments. What is the vulnerability for that region, for the people who are living and working there? Once we get an understanding of that, that will also tell us what are the climate risks for that community. And then we can work with the community to develop risk mitigation strategies. That has to be the way forward, where people, the policymakers, local organizations all work together to make piece by piece the entire city climate resilient. Climate literacy is the other angle of it. We do need a responsible citizenship. But here, I'd like to submit here that we actually need different approaches while talking to different population groups. Because as the very apt topic of this conference, this decade is the most critical decade. In this decade, we have to start seeing a reduction in our fossil fuel consumption, which means that people who are today in the driving seat of decision making in various sectors, they are the ones who have to be the priority target with they have to imbibe low carbon thinking. And because we are seeing all these impacts and changes in the weather cycles, they also have to start imbibing the adaptation thinking. So working professionals across sectors, we need to have conversations with them on these issues. When it comes to young adults, college going students, university students, these are the people who will come into the workforce towards the end of this decade or in the next decade. There, by that time, resilience, developing resilience is really going to become a big priority. Therefore, reducing emissions and how to build long-term resilience, those have to be the priorities in talking to young adults. For school-going children, I'm really sorry to say this, but we really do need to prepare them for the worst case scenario. So there, the focus actually has to be more on adaptation with low carbon thinking. And when it comes to vulnerable communities, we shouldn't really be going around lecturing them about reducing carbon emissions. We should be talking to them about how to adapt to the changes and how to build long-term resilience. So depending on who we are talking to, and what role that population group can play in solving this problem today and tomorrow. Accordingly, we have to tailor our messaging when we are building climate literacy in the society. We have been trying to do this for the last few years in Pune and in other cities also. We are using various formats in talking to different people, both offline and online. We have collaborated with various organizations to bring them together and trying to make connections between specific issues that people are working on, how those issues at the city level are linked with climate change. We also offer a couple of online courses now. One is a basic carbon accounting course. I feel that working professionals 5 years, 6 years, 10 years down the line will need to have at least a basic understanding of how carbon accounting works, because for their own survival, businesses will have to keep an account of their carbon emissions as well as their efforts to reduce carbon emissions. And it may even become a statutory requirement for at least for some sectors. And therefore, apart from your own professional skill, people who have this additional knowledge of carbon accounting will have an edge in the job market. We also are offering a course which gives a 360-degree view of what is happening around climate change issues across the world with a focus on India. And that's the course on climate change, science, politics, ethics, and action. So these are some of the things that we have been doing. I believe that we can really solve this in this decade if we all come together, join hands, join our efforts while we work with various priorities. If we do that, then we can really make this happen. So please do get in touch with us. We are on all social media as Citizens of Sustainable City. If you connect with us, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you will get to know of the various activities that we are doing. And please do visit the websites inec.net and samuchit.com to know more about the various activities that I have just touched upon today. So thank you very much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with this august audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Aman, for that insightful lecture on cities and their both their potential in climate action and also the risks which they are facing, and also about the citizen movement, business leadership, and everything you talked about. We are also trying to cover all these topics within this conference. We'll now move on to the question and answer session. We actually extended the talks a bit because we had such dynamic speakers, but we'll try to take a few questions from the audience. So I'll just include all the audience in the screen. So the first, there are a lot of questions actually in the Q&A section as well as the comment section. I have just tried to compile a few of them. So the first question is for Ravi Pandit, sir. What are your views on compressed air energy storage, CAES, and liquid compressed air energy storage, LCAES? And also one person has asked, how do you think will the crypto technology, or rather can crypto technology play a role in decentralization?
So on the compressed air, I have seen a lot of incomplete or inaccurate information. See, I think one cannot forget that compressing air takes a lot of energy, and how much energy you put in and how much energy you use is really the issue that one is to look at. And I would imagine that the efficiency would be quite low if you look at even the basic normal laws of entropy. The second question was about crypto. The data shows that the energy consumption of crypto usage is exceptionally high. And here again, I have some concerns. The way I would look at it is that we must try and work out the major blocks where action is required. I believe that blocks where actions are required are some industries like cement, steel, etc., our mobility, our agriculture. I think these are the big chunks where we need to do some work. And those are the problems that we should address first.
Thanks a lot, sir. Next, I would like to share two questions with Professor Amitabh Malik. Sir, this is one interesting question. So more than interesting, it's very emotive that he says that all the talks mention fully can be, will be, should be, but only in future tense. But do we think like we need to do action in this decade on war footing? And do you think that such sort of action is missing? And the second question is about social cost of carbon. If you could give some example of it.
Okay. Today, in a conference like this, since my talk was one of the first talk to paint the picture, I restricted myself to what are the possibilities and what are the problems. But yes, there is a lot of action that is already possible. And actually, many things are already happening. So we have taken up a specific project to drive Pune towards carbon neutrality by 2030. And under that, under various verticals, we are actually looking at pilot projects that can achieve some degree of reduction, carbon emission reduction, and that would set the process. So yes, within this decade itself, much of the action has to happen. Second question on social cost of carbon. Well, it's a economic estimate of the damage caused by the climate impact. You can either measure it in terms of the per ton of emission, or you can measure it in terms of the per degree of temperature rise. And you kind of estimate what is the total cost of economic loss for a given section of population. If you divide that total cost by the population, then it becomes the social cost of the carbon. It's a very simplistic explanation I'm giving. The actual calculation is a little more complex, but that's a whole point of the discussion is that there is no free lunch anymore. If you are emitting, you will have to pay it in some way or other. So that's the answer I feel like giving. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Roxy Matthew Kaur, why is the condition of the Indian Ocean so special that it, like, are there any reasons why Indian Ocean in particular is warming faster? Or
yeah, there are multiple reasons, but I will give the simplest reason. One reason is that compared to the Atlantic and Pacific, which is open in the north and south to the poles, so the heat flux, I mean the flow of heat from the equator towards the poles is much more open and easy going over there. But if you look at the Indian Ocean, it's landlocked over the north, so there is no way for that additional heat to get flushed out easily. There is only few exits in the south. So that is one reason. And also there is a huge influx of, there is something called the Indonesian through flow. These are narrow straits between the Pacific and the Indian Ocean through the seas of the Indonesia. So there is some warm water, additional flux of warm water coming from the Pacific to the subsurface of the Indian Ocean. So there are these. So basically, it is how the ocean currents and the atmosphere circulation, all these work together. So that's one reason why the Indian Ocean is warming much more faster than the other ocean basins. And we are seeing the impact of that.
thank you. Dr. Karve, there are one question is about, you have partially answered it, but can you talk some more about the role of plants in carbon sequestration and how to measure how much oxygen and CO2 each plant emits? And second question is, which is more specific to Pune, will glass towers, radiated heat and other such like cement infrastructure built up in cities is now seeking densification and to show a better metro usage in the future. So will that lead to any downward spiraling in Pune of development or resilience?
Yeah, thanks. Well, short answer to the second question, yes. I mean, the more concrete you pour in, more concretized infrastructure you have, you are going to see heat island effect. And as it is, because of global warming, the ambient temperature is higher, and you have this additional increase in temperature locally. So that is going to particularly come into play when you have, let's say, heat waves. So this becomes a very intense heat wave locally. So that is in a way linked with what I was saying earlier, that really urban planners need to go back to the drawing board and rethink basic principles of urban planning itself. So far, climate change has not factored into their calculations. So that they have to start doing now. About the first question, trees are using carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in the process of photosynthesis, and that is how they grow. So it is the biomass that is holding the carbon, and that's the carbon gets sequestered. It is a temporary sequestration because eventually the tree will die and it will release the carbon back into the atmosphere. It is part of the natural carbon cycle, and therefore you need a sustainable vegetative growth in order to really truly capture carbon and hold it. Ecosystems are more effective than artificially created monocultured plantations. It's a misconception that these are responsible for oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen in the atmosphere is because of phytoplanktons and blue-green bacteria, and we still have 20% oxygen in the atmosphere. Although the carbon dioxide ppm has been going up and down, that has remained constant because the source of oxygen is not trees, but it is coming from all these microorganisms which are primarily in ocean. So trees are not playing any role as far as the oxygen balance is concerned. The role of trees is more for keeping carbon captured, at least for a duration of time as far as their lifetime goes. That is the short answer. I mean, we can have a longer debate on this separately.
Thanks a lot. I thank all the speakers for those informative and elaborate talks, and we learned a lot just from one session, enough for the whole day actually. So we will just break for 5 minutes and start the next session at 6 p.m. Please stay in the meeting. You can just go away from the your machines, but stay connected. We will start the next session just in another 2 or 3 minutes.
Thank you.
We will resume the session in another 2 minutes. We'll start the session in another minute. After that informative and elaborate first session, we now will start our second session for today. And we are blessed with a very we are blessed with a very interesting and diverse panel for this session, and it includes youth from different walks of life, right from research, leadership to entrepreneurship, though although the person who was going to talk about entrepreneur, Dr. Dinesh Desai, could not join us, but still we have a very wide representation from academia and so on. So the second session, it aims to bring out the youth perspectives and ideas and highlights the need to achieve meaningful climate action. The speakers we have today are Ms. Archana Soren. She is a climate warrior from an indigenous tribe in Odisha. She is one of the 7 members of the Youth on Climate Change established by the Secretary General of the United Nations, and has been working on awareness about climate change and documentation, preservation, and promotion of the indigenous and traditional knowledge practices from the indigenous communities. She is also associated with TIS India and is a research officer at Vasundhara, Odisha. The next speaker, Mr. Yash Agarwal, is an assistant professor at KJ Somaiya College of Arts and Commerce and a visiting faculty at Kirit P. Mehta School of Law. He is a philosopher and an environmentalist who has research and teaching background in environmental ethics and intergenerational justice. He has completed masters in philosophy. I welcome Yash to this conference and we look forward to your talk. Our next speaker is Mr. Prithviraj Lingayat. who is a researcher with the Energy, Environment and Climate Change vertical at PIC and also associated with Climate Collective Pune. He's connected with many NGOs and volunteering groups and is actively working on social and environmental issues. He's a co-creator of the Ecofusion e-magazine and the CCP News Bulletin. He is currently studying at ILS Law School and is interested in environmental law. I request our first panelist, Ms. Archana Soren, to share her work and on the topic of raising climate consciousness. Over to you, Archana. And welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Johar everyone, it's a pleasure to be here and I'm so happy and proud to be here, and I would like to thank the entire team for giving me this opportunity to be here. Talking about my work and climate action discourse. Today I would like to say to all the young people and all the panelists and all the speakers who have been here from a very diverse, and I really look forward to everyone's work, is that I think young people are very important stakeholders in terms of climate action discourse. We young people have been working in various sectors and various thematics, whether it is advocating in the streets or whether it is advocating in policy making spaces and different arena, both in the global level, national level or regional level. We have been there all out, yet there has been inadequate representation of the young people in the policy making spaces and in the implementation spaces. So one of the things which I would like to highlight and would like to emphasize is the need of ensuring that there is adequate representation of young people. And when I say about adequate representation of young people, I would also like to highlight the need of emphasizing a diverse and intersectional representation of young people. And when I say about a representation, I would also like to highlight that there has been immense young people who are out there and working. I think one of the things which is really important is to start identifying the work done by the young peoples. And that is what I feel the need to identify and the need to document the work of the young people by the policy making spaces and by the other stakeholders and institutions is really, really important, because it's really important also to see what the young people are doing and then support them, rather than, just going ahead in the willing to support, because I think there are a lot of work already existing. So in order to stop the overlapping and imposition of work, I really feel it's really important to ensure that identification of young people, supporting young people, and ensuring that there is adequate representation. The second thing which I would like to really highlight is in terms of capacity building of young people. And again, when I say capacity building of young people, I would like to say that often when we talk about capacity building, it's like young people do not know anything. We need to teach them. We need to tell them to do this, that, and a lot of things. I would like to say that when we are talking about capacity building of young people, I think we should come from a place that, yes, young people have seen it. Young people are experiencing the climate crisis, and young people, just a bit of power cut, I'll just take a minute. Hello. Yeah, I hope I'm visible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So I was talking about capacity building of young people, and I would like to say that when we talk about capacity building of young people, there has often been imposition that young people do not know and they need to be taught and they need to be told this. I think this entire narrative and entire perspective needs to introspect it. I feel the young people, when we are talking about capacity building, we should can see that young people are experiencing climate crisis. Young people have been out there being vocal about climate crisis, and that's where we need to see that what capacity building is important for young people, what needs to be given to the young people, which the young people need. It's not that we are imposing that you need to be there, you need to be there. So I think, and I believe, and I want to say all the young people, that we are doing amazing work in all the spaces. And that's why I also believe and firmly would like to emphasize that climate action is not only a single way of work to do. Climate action can be done through multiple ways. Like we are having a lot of young people in research. We are having a lot of young people in other like whether it is science, whether it is arts, whether it is sports, or whether it is any of those kinds. And we also have a lot of young people working on ground. So I think do what you feel like doing in terms of the thematic or in terms of the specialities or in terms of the talents you have. You can contribute towards climate action in your own capacity, in your own way. What is required in today's world is the willingness to contribute. And that's what I really feel in terms of us as different stakeholders working with young people. I think if we write a singer, a dancer, and a lot more, we can do multiple ways in which we can contribute, multiple ways of contributing towards climate action. And as we are talking about climate consciousness, I think that's what is really important, to contextualize climate action, to contextualize climate crisis, because at this point of time, it's really important to understand that climate crisis is not being felt or impacted by each one of us in a similar way. We all are facing climate crisis, but in a very, very different way. And that is where I would also like to bring on the fact of language. I think language is really, really important. And coming from an indigenous background, I strongly feel that there are so many communities, and that is really important to ensure that we can make sure that we are reaching out to diverse young people in a different language, because that language is really important in terms of ensuring that people are able to engage and we are being able to reach out to people. And the third thing which I would like to say, that we do say that young people should be part of climate action discourse, but I strongly believe that there needs to be safe and enabling spaces for young people to speak, because we want young people to speak and we want young people to engage, but what is about the safety? And that's what I feel really grateful to be part of this youth advisory group on climate change by Secretary General, because I feel this is one of the safest space to speak to the power, what is the problem, what is the challenges, and how things can be done better. And that's what I feel from a more leadership in global level, regional level, national level. We need those spaces where young people can engage in a very free and frank manner and be honest to power in terms of what are going wrong and what needs to be done. And summing up on my intervention, I would like to say that it's really important to ensure that young people are meaningfully engaged. When I say meaningfully engaged, it's also ensuring that they are parts of projects, they're parts of policies drafting, they are parts of consultation, they are parts of policy making processes and initiatives and projects, and they're part of it from the beginning till the end, from the drafting till the implementation, and not mere tokenized, like we need young people to be part of the process. So we reach out to young people, or we have, because I want to say that there's a lot of youth tokenism also across the globe, and that's what needs to be taken into consideration. And coming from an indigenous community, I would also like to say that when we are talking about indigenous youth, it's really, really important that we ensure and we emphasize on the rights recognition of the indigenous people over the land, forest, and territories. Because if we see the impact which the climate crisis is having on the young people of the indigenous community, it's the stake of their life, identity, and food security and safety. And the least can be done in terms of safeguarding them is recognizing their rights, making them that they are secure, the land is secure, the forest is secure. And that is what is really important. And that's what I really feel, that indigenous people and local communities are contributing immensely towards climate action through the traditional knowledge and practice practices, yet they are the ones who are most affected by climate crisis. And that's why I strongly say that indigenous people and local communities should be leaders of conservation and climate action and not victims of it. So at the end, I would like to say all the young people, we all are different and we all are unique and we all have the power to change. And that's what is, everyone is important because everyone's perspective is important and we all need you. And I just want to tell this honestly, there's so much space in this climate action discourse, but it seems that there's no space for anyone or everyone. I just want to say that there's a lot of space. We all can work together. You matter, your perspective matters, and it's really important for everyone to contribute in whichever you can. So yes, we can work towards climate action and together we can definitely do it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that very insightful speech, Archana, and talking about the very important aspect of contextualizing climate crisis, which is missing many times in the climate narratives. And like you said about indigenous people, it's now known that most of the primitive forests are guarded actually by indigenous communities. So what we need to really responsibly do is safeguard these practices to our best, with our best efforts. And thanks a lot for joining us today. We will have the Q&A session after the next two talks. So I will now invite our next speaker today, which is Mr. Yash Agarwal, Assistant Professor at Somaiya College. And Yash will be talking about addressing intergenerational justice. Over to you, Yash.
Thank you, Miss Aditi, and thank you to Pune International Center for inviting me to speak in this conference. Am I audible fine?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I am sharing my screen. Just a minute.
Yeah, take it.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this conference. Yes, I will be talking about intergenerational justice, but I would like to begin with a story. So this story is one which all of you know. It is the story of the goose that laid the golden eggs. You must have heard about it, and I also had heard about it when I was young. A person had a goose which would give golden eggs on a regular basis, and the person would use those eggs to satisfy his life, like to live his livelihood, to fulfill his needs. And he was like somewhat wealthy because of that. He was able to he had no problems in his life financially because of the goose that gave the golden eggs. One day he thought that if he killed the goose, he would get all the golden eggs at once. And so he decided to kill it, and he did kill it. But he did not get any golden eggs from the goose. In fact, the opportunity to get the golden eggs that he used to get on a daily basis, like one egg every day, that was also lost because he had killed the goose. And at that time, so this story was about it is about greed, and when I was young I thought that okay, this is just about greed, that we should not be greedy, and that is the moral of this story. But now I have realized that this has a deeper meaning. In this story it has a deeper meaning, and it can be said to symbolize the way unsustainable development and the exploitation of natural resources is happening in today's time. The Symbolically, I'm saying that this story can be said to reflect the way we are depleting our own resources and we are destroying the ecosystems which provide us ecosystem services, which enable us to survive. So our own survival systems are getting damaged because of the greed and exploitation that we are doing. So what I mean is that it may not be in the greed in the ordinary sense as we understand it, but the what is called as the business as usual lifestyle that we are currently undergoing, that companies in this world are following without being sustainable, where sustainability is not considered, the preservation of environment is not considered, that is leading to harm in the future. And this example, if I want to give for this, I can say that how chemical intensive agriculture and genetically modified crops are used to get a higher produce from the land, which actually reduces the fertility of the soil, reduces the sustaining capacity of the soil. Similarly, overfishing is where the fish stocks are depleted, or other things like deforestation and destruction of mangroves, and pollution and warming of the atmosphere. All these are in some way or the other, basically they can be said to be they can reflect the same story of the goose that laid the golden eggs. So we are destroying our environment. We are destroying not just something that is separate from us, but our own ability in the future to benefit from the, like, to survive in the future. It is being affected. There is a slogan that has become popular, that is Gati Shakti, speed is power. But I would say that Gati is not always Shakti. Speed is not always power. In fact, it is often Vipatti. I would say Gati Vipatti. That means speed is calamity. Speed leads to disasters. Why do I say that? Because if the speed at which we are utilizing and the speed at which we are consuming resources is increased, then that is causing injustice for the future generations. And that is why I am saying that this story is very significant, and we need to understand the future generations. So now coming to my the topic about intergenerational justice, I would like to explain again another analogy, that is the analogy of rivers. The relation between the past, present, and future generations is one directional. It is asymmetrical. And this can be explained by the help of this example or this analogy of rivers. Here you can see that there are numbers 1, 2, and 3. So 1 is the upstream part of this river, and 2 is in the middle, and 3 is in the downstream part of the river. Now you can just consider that what this river represents is the 3 generations that I can say. 1 is the past generations, 2 is the present generation, and the number 3 is the future generations. Why I am saying that is because the way the river flows in one direction, similarly time flows in one direction. The actions of the past generations can affect the actions of the future generations. That means the present as well as the future generations relative to that generation. So my generation's actions can affect the conditions of the future generation, but it can never happen that the past can affect the future. As long as a time machine is invented, at least till then, it can never happen that the past can affect the future. So if suppose people living in the area of number 1 decide to build a dam and a reservoir, and therefore storing the water coming from the mountains, then there will be shortage of water for the people living at 2 and 3. This is how, if the past generations consume more than the present and the future generations, that is the coming generations, will suffer from the scarcity. Similarly, if people at number 1 decide to pollute the river by throwing contaminants and garbage, then the consequences will have to be suffered by number 2 and the people at number 2 and number 3. And this is how the timeline or the relation between the 3 generations is as well. On the right side, you can see a map, and that is of the northeast Africa, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, where the river Nile flows. Now, just how we do have in the world different geopolitical conflicts regarding rivers, how are rivers to be managed. Now, the conflict in this region is that Ethiopia is making a dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which gives it the ability to control the water that is flowing into the river Nile downstream. And this puts the livelihoods and life of people in Egypt, the downstream part of Nile, at great risk, because the control will be in the hands of Ethiopia. Similarly, in Asia, China controls Tibet, and Tibet is where the Himalayas are. Many rivers originate in Tibet. So if China decides it can construct dams, and this can limit the flow of water to different countries in Asia, like Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Myanmar, etc. So it can never happen that someone living in the downstream area can affect the area, the river in the upstream areas, because river flows from upstream to downstream, and that is also how the time flows. So this is the relation between the three generations that I have explained, that this is an asymmetrical relation, and this is the unique characteristic of the relation between the three generations, which is the foundation of what we call as the intergenerational justice. I would like to give another analogy to explain what is actually happening. Now, just you know what is a time machine, like you can see in Doraemon show. Time machine is a concept like we travel to the future. Suppose there are some people who decide to take the waste and garbage and pollutants, basically symbolically the harmful consequences of their actions, to the future, and they want to dump it, then come back to the golden period that is where they are living. So you can see in the right side diagram, which is a cartoon by Kendra LNB. The person is saying, quick, grab the fresh water, dump the carbon and nuclear waste, and then let's get the hell back to the present. So this is what is symbolically happening, even though there is no actual time travel. But what is happening is that the consequences of the actions of the present generations will have to be faced by the future generations, because the pollution which is causing global warming and other consequences, including sea level rise, species extinction, biodiversity extinction, and climate extreme weather events, all these are happening because of the actions that we are doing, the lifestyle that we have, and the way the system that we have. And this helps to understand what we are doing and why this is unjust. So if you understand what I am pointing out towards, is that the injustice that the future generations are going to suffer for no fault of theirs. And this is why we need to understand that this is a problem of injustice. So what is intergenerational ethics or intergenerational justice? And there's another term called as intragenerational ethics and intragenerational justice. You can see in the diagram, so suppose the middle column, the middle people are the present people, and on the top you can see the past generations, and on the bottom is the future generations in this diagram. So intragenerational ethics would be the ethics that is applicable to the members of a single generation, a single time period, and intergeneration is that which is about the relation between different generations, past, present, and future. So when I talk about ethics, I mean the how are the moral relations, the obligations, the duties decided, and what are they? What are those which we have? Which obligations do we have, and to whom and why? And when I talk about justice, as you know, that within a theory of justice, if I talk about intergenerational ethics, then that is intergenerational justice. Similarly, if I am talking about intragenerational relations, usually people don't even use the term intragenerational, because it's assumed to be about the same generation, unless, or the same time period, that is the present time period. And that is why we always specify intergenerational, but hardly we specify intragenerational, because that is almost always obvious, almost always obvious. So that is, we have to realize that that is not the way it should be. And the intergenerational justice is also important to be considered. So the thing is that when we talk about the relations that are applicable within members of a common generation or a common time period, then there are certain characteristics. That is, they can have reciprocity, they can have mutual cooperation, they can affect each other. That is the biggest thing. But in the case of intergenerational, especially if they are in completely different time periods, then there is a relation of asymmetry. Only one can affect the other. And this is what makes this relation a unique kind of relation. And when we talk about intragenerational justice, of course, we have different kinds of levels or different kinds of types, like between the rich and the poor, and the healthy and the sick, and the disabled and the abled. Different other ways also where we need to ensure justice. When we talk about intergenerational, again, this does not mean that I should only be concerned about my specific descendants' welfare. Of course, I should be considered about everyone's, the whole humanity's welfare. And this is applicable not just for me, but everyone must think in this way. That is, the justice that we want to be achieved cannot be individual centric, and I cannot even specify, since the future is unknown. So sometimes people claim that we cannot care for the future people, but this is not true, because we can affect the environment, and the environment affects the conditions of the future generations, and hence we have the obligation to care for the future generations. That means we have to ensure that we are leaving a good environment which has the resources and the ecosystem services that are necessary for their survival. So we have to understand this, and this is the what I mean by intergenerational justice. So preserving environment is an obligation that we have towards the future generations. And now, how do we ensure this intergenerational justice? There are just a few points that I would like to mention among many other things that can be said on this topic. First is that we have to understand how to think long term. This is something that is taught to children, but unfortunately it is missing even in adults in the decision making that people do in various spheres of life, whether it is governments or individuals or companies. The decisions are not taken for the long term. Now, as you can see in the diagram, of course, the different decisions that we take are of different time spans depending on what we are thinking about. But at the same time, we need to ensure that we have a perspective of long term. Thinking about the long term has to be something that has to be a default in our mindset. This is called as long-termism, and it is a concept in philosophy which basically says that we need to inculcate the habit of being able to think about the long-term consequences of our actions. I am reminded of a quote of Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, who said that the one who plants trees knowing that he will never sit in their shade has at least has at least started to understand the meaning of life. Basically, I have to understand and I have to keep in mind what can be the consequences of my actions in the far future, not just in the near future. Now, when I talk about the importance of thinking long term, this does not mean that the present generations should suffer. They should not be made to suffer in the name of intergenerational justice. There has to be justice even for the present generations. Now, in the diagram, you can see basically what we are witnessing now is these kind of development where people are made to suffer from inconvenience, and they are saying that this is for your future benefit, and Mumbai is upgrading and it will be better. But the harm that is being caused to people in the present because of such this is metro construction, and metro construction is causing indeed a lot of noise and air pollution and inconvenience to pedestrians as well as vehicles in different areas where the construction is going on. I am mentioning this as an example to say that we should by giving the dreams of better days ahead, if we are causing suffering to the present generations, that is not justified as well, because this air pollution, this noise pollution resulting from the construction activities is in fact harming the environment and harming the conditions of our own life. So when I talk about intergenerational justice, I am mindful of this, that we should not ignore the present generation's concerns. So thirdly, of course, we can also not ignore the importance of intragenerational justice. That means the justice within the generation. Climate crisis is, or this climate crisis is not something that is only going to affect the future. It is already affecting the present. We are already being affected because of the actions of the past generations. And within us, of course, the most affected people are the poor, the marginalized, and those who are engaged in primary sector occupations, or those which are from the weaker sections of the societies. You can see in the photo, these photos are of fisher folks who live on the coast of Mumbai. They used to live in their villages. By village, I mean the settlement in Mumbai itself where they stayed. But now, due to the coastal road work, the project Mumbai Coastal Road, the village is no more, and they are living in these conditions in these makeshift shelters on the seashores of Mumbai. And this is the injustice that has happened with them because of the work that is happening in the name of improving transport traffic conditions by the coastal road project. So whatever development has to be done, it has to be sustainable, and it has to take into consideration the justice for the communities that are affected. That is, the intra-generational justice has to be ensured. But this is not what is happening, and that is the sad part. Now, this fourth thing that I would like to mention, when we talk about thinking about the future, thinking about the future generations, about intergenerational justice.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but please can you finish in 2 minutes?
Yes,
We'll
yes.
have speaker and
Yes.
questions.
Yes, sure. So even Dr. Priyadarshini has talked about this a bit. So basically, we believe, people often have the tendency to believe that because technology has made their lives comfortable, it will also be able to solve environmental problems. But this is, I believe, a mistaken belief. A lot of the benefit that technology has provided to us has been at the cost of the environment. For example, if we are using air conditioners to keep ourselves cool, it is warming and polluting the environment. If we are getting cheap clothes from synthetic materials, it is leading to microplastic pollution and contaminating the water bodies. So what I mean to say is that we cannot solve the climate crisis only by depending on technology. Of course, technology has some role to play, but it cannot solve all the problems if we continue this lifestyle of overconsumption. And that is what is the Jevons paradox, which is technology increases the efficiency of the goods and the machinery. But if we continue to increase the consumption, then the efficiency does not result in the environmental benefits that we want to bring about. So also, when I say that we cannot have technological optimism, I mean in this sense that we cannot think in this way that whatever consequences of my actions will be there. Future generations will use that technological development, which will be presumably advanced by that time, to solve those problems. This does not happen because technology will never be at that level to solve the problems. And even if there is, it won't be available for everyone. It won't be affordable. People will still suffer. And therefore, it is necessary that we, so this example I just mentioned that I have showed about metros. Now we can have bus lanes, which are there in hundreds of cities around the world. And this has high carrying capacity in low space and is free of traffic. So this is of high speed. And then why are we making metros in our cities when we can have bus lanes to provide eco-friendly, fast public transport? So this is that has to be understood by every one of us, by policymakers, so that we can ensure intergenerational justice. We can have bus lanes instead of metros, and we can use low-cost technologies whenever we don't require high technology. Only when we require should we go for higher technology. So I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks a lot, Yash. It was a very engaging talk and very important points you made there, which was first about speed, second about long-termism, and the river analogy was excellent. So thanks a lot again for joining us, and we'll take questions after this last talk by Mr. Prithviraj Lingayat.
So I think Mr. Yash would have to.
So Prithviraj will talk about shaping the new carbon neutral world. He works with Climate Collective Pune. Over to you, Prithvi.
Didi, please tell me if my screen is visible to you.
Yes, it's starting. Yes, your screen is visible.
So I'll go now.
Yes.
Namaste to everyone here. In the last few years, you must have heard so many things about climate change from so many experts, news agencies, TV shows, etc. And now you might be wondering, what does this 22-year-old guy have to add to this already vibrant discussion? So to answer your question, I'm here to unravel the most talked about solution to climate change, that is net carbon neutrality or net zero. And I'm also here to put forth,
sorry, just to, there is a bit of an echo in your side, I think.
Am I not audible? Is this better?
Yes, okay.
So, should I repeat the part or I'll just continue?
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Prithvi.
Okay,
yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. So I'm basically here to unravel the most talked about solution to climate change, that is net carbon neutrality, and also put forth how my generation wants to shape this new carbon neutral future. So let's start. A not so fun fact to start with is that the time it took me to introduce my talk, we humans emitted more than 10,000 metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere. And on the other hand, we also cut down 5,000 more trees. These two facts coupled together make me worried and anxious about what my future would look like. Because on one side, we are actually creating a huge problem. And on the other side, we are also taking away its solution. It makes me question everyone. Are we bringing onto ourselves our own peril? Or is there some promise left in our future? Now, all of you must have different answers to this question. But as paradoxical as it may sound, what I believe is I can see both promise and peril in our future. It all depends on the actions that we take in this crucial decade. Why, you may ask? So let me tell you. For that, you'll have to come with me on a short time-traveling journey when we see what the world would look like to my generation in the next 80 years. So in the year 2000, when I was born, climate change was not really such a big global catastrophic issue. But in just the last 22 years of my lifetime, it has grown exponentially, making it the biggest existential threat to humanity right now. And if we don't change our ways in the year 2030, that is, by the end of this decade, we would have started a major climate catastrophe. 18 to 30% of coral reefs will be lost, which would majorly affect our marine ecosystem and also the ability of our oceans to absorb carbon. Rapid unplanned urbanization and urban sprawls would continue to put a massive stress on the whole urban ecosystem and natural resources. And all this would happen only for one reason: the disregard for science. So if this is sounding to you like a beginning of a science fiction movie, it is a mere coincidence, believe me. As we reach the mid of the century, that is the year 2050, there would be chaos all around. Floods, droughts, fires, storms, and conflicts would have become the regular occurrences. A nice sunny day or a monsoon that turns up on time would actually be the things that would surprise us the most. And this would also be the juncture when humanity realizes that chasing mere economic aspirations was futile, but it would be too late. At the end of this decade, if I'm alive, I'll be 100 years old, and the earth would be utterly unrecognizable to me. Why? Because our world would have reached 4 degrees Celsius threshold. Our once hustling, bustling coastal cities would be long gone. They would have disappeared due to the sea level rise. The complexity and unforeseeability of climate change would have risen so high that we would have no more solutions. And amid all this destruction, when I look back and I ask myself, where did we really go wrong? I would only have one answer: the decade 2020 to 2030. Because in this decade, we had all the scientific proof that we required. We had all the human and technological potential that we required, and yet we did not start action. We waited and called this transformation as a radical change, and that has led us to this kind of world. I'm really sorry to paint such a gloomy picture in front of you, but this is what will really happen if we do not take climate action right now. But this is not the world we want. So what does the youth really want? So in this slide, we have tried to put together a framework of priorities of the youth and also principles which can help us shape our new carbon neutral world. So the first component in this framework is L for livability, a livable earth. What do we mean by livable? A livable earth, which means a world which caters to the basic needs of all life forms, like clean air, clean water, abundant habitat. So we cannot provide it to all the other life forms because they already deserve it. But what we can do is we can ensure that we no longer take it back from them. The second component is that we need an inclusive world, a world which is politically, socially, and economically inclusive, and also understands and accepts that the development pathways of different communities will be different. The third component is being future-proof or creating a future-proof world. What does future-proof really mean to you? So to me, it means building resilience to unforeseen environmental disasters. Being future-proof will actually provide stability to our lives and businesses. The last component of our framework is E, being ecologically mindful or creating an ecologically mindful world. A world where ecological integrity is valued. This is what will help us synergize in our economy and environment. This framework basically tells you what does the youth prioritize. The youth today prioritizes life over just economic aspirations or financial growth. This framework can also be useful in multiple ways. Firstly, it addresses multiple sustainable development goals. Second, it can help humanity stay under the planetary boundaries. That is, we do not go beyond what the earth can produce. Third, if these solutions, if these are taken up as principles and we create development models based on these, those development models would be centered around well-being and not just around economy. And the last benefit of this is that this is what will help us shape the new carbon neutral world. Now, let me take a minute here. I want to assign a task to all the participants present here and even the panelists if they feel like. Even the panelists if they feel like doing it. So what do you have to do is you have to do a small activity where you mention in the chat box, what do you think are the priorities of the youth today? Because this was an exercise which engrossed me a lot, and it was a really good kind of exercise where I thought about how I want my future to be like. So I want everyone else also to try this through the chat box as I go on with the other slides. So what really means achieving net carbon neutrality or a net carbon neutral world? In simple terms, all our human actions have some or the other carbon footprint to them. For example, when you drive your car, you emit some carbon into the atmosphere. All these carbon molecules end up heating our world and causing global warming. So they must go away. How will they go away? We need to change our operations to become zero carbon or low carbon, but it would still, there would be some emissions still remaining. Those emissions need to be counterbalanced by carbon offsets, like Dr. Karve rightly mentioned, by creating, by restoring the natural ecosystems. But there are three important things, three important prerequisites to net carbon neutrality. We need to reduce our energy demand. Our energy demand cannot keep on rising while we are trying to go carbon neutral. Second, we need to invest highly in low carbon innovation and not in coal or fossil fuel. And third, we need to create more carbon sinks. That is, we need to restore more land. These three are essential to maintain the net carbon neutral state of our environment. So now we have seen what does net carbon neutrality mean, what the solution looks like, and we have also seen the life framework. Now we come to the real actions that need to be taken to shape this net carbon neutral world. We in CCP have developed this Arc for Life framework in our house itself. So these are 7 critical actionable solutions that need to be implemented in this decade itself. So while I go through these solutions, you would understand why the words multi-stakeholder approach, interconnectedness or multi-systems approach are used so many times in the climate change discussion. So first solution is electrification. We need to electrify the way we work, the way we transport, the way we do business. And this first solution needs to be coupled with the second solution, that is decarbonization of energy grids. That is, we need to produce energy through renewable means only. And if these two solutions come together, we can actually reduce 70% of our greenhouse gases, which are actually emitted from the energy sector. The third important action is adapting to climate impacts. Now, climate impacts are a tricky thing because they are unforeseeable. But by acting in a systematic manner, we can actually adapt to these climate impacts. And adaptation can be small, like just changing your diet from meat-based to plant-based diet and low dairy diet, to adapting your governance systems, adapting your business systems. The fourth solution is restoring natural ecosystems, and Karve ma'am beautifully pointed out its importance, so I won't explain that much here. The fifth one is essentially important, and I like to say that if we do not implement the fifth one, we would actually all the other actions would be meaningless, because mindful consumption, hyper-consumption is what has actually led us into this huge climate crisis. So mindful consumption is a way out of it. Now, for the sixth solution, you must have heard, and I think Dr. Roxy also mentioned, that climate change is a global catastrophe, but the solutions are local. And in order to implement those local solutions, you need to create climate conscious communities which can work with the government and even without the government, which can help each other reduce their ecological footprint. And the last action is that we need to change the way we manufacture. We need to increase the efficiency of our natural resources. We need to reduce the waste. And the best solution to do this is by creating a circular economy. And I'm happy to say that tomorrow there will be a talk on this specific issue. So as you must have understood, we saw what the life framework, what the principles for this net carbon neutral world should be. These are the actions that we need to take, but merely chasing actions without the right mindset would be a big mistake. Because whenever a transformation or revolution happens in a society, not all people understand the technicalities of the whole transition. Some people do understand it, but others work by understanding what values are required for that transformation. Values basically tell you what is right and wrong. So in the climate space, when we are creating a new carbon neutral world, we also need to look at some of these values. The first one is commitment. Now, all of you must have seen many huge countries who are still the biggest polluters of this world have not yet committed to go net zero. So commitment is an essential value that is lacking and must be fostered into our new carbon neutral world. The second is compassion. If we lack compassion and concern towards all life forms, we would again end up like how the last generation ended up, exploiting the earth. That should be strictly avoided. The third value is an important one, and the quote below summarizes it pretty well. It is precisely because the force of circumstances tends always to destroy equality that the force of legislation must always tend to maintain it. Think about climate justice. The impacts of climate change are not equally distributed. Some vulnerable communities are going to get hampered the most, and social equity should not be debated about, but it should be inculcated into the value system of this new carbon neutral world. And lastly, collectivism. I think much has been talked about collectivism, so I'll move forward. Now, taking a more systems kind of view, as we make policies in the Pune International Center, we tend to see what is beneath the surface of the water. So the actions that the Arc for Life represent, that is the surface, but that surface or that building needs a sturdy foundation, a strong foundation. And good integrated policies, what we advocate here in PIC is that we need integrated climate economic policies or integrated environmental economics policies. So in the solutions also you saw, it is not just the job of the environment ministry to go carbon neutral. We'll require more than 10, 12 ministries in our latest cabinet list to help in this transition. The second one is systemic changes. So we need to understand that our systems, like legislation, it may be legislation, judiciary, etc., etc. They were not built in the era of climate change. Climate change came afterwards. And that is a good enough reason to change them and shape them in a way that they work on the cure and not just the symptoms. Third one is we need to develop a scientific attitude in our decision making. Till when are we going to ignore the IPCC report, scientists, etc.? We need to actually imbibe this scientific attitude in our policy making. And decentralization, which also was mentioned very well by Dr. Karve. So I won't probably go into that. But this decade of change also signifies that this is the decade of the change makers, that is the youth. So I want this decade of change to also become the decade of youth. And that means we need to empower the youth. We need to empower people like me, people like you attending this session. So how do you empower the youth? So in the Indian political system, there are many checks and balances. And the Rajya Sabha is one such check on the legislation, that is the Lok Sabha. So the responsible political parties must nominate representatives under 35 years of age to Rajya Sabha so that climate change actually becomes an election issue. And good laws are also made in our parliaments. Empowering the social governance system. The leaders of tomorrow are going to come from the grassroots. And therefore, it is very necessary to empower social governance systems like mohalla communities or gram panchayats. The future generation need to be taken into decision making actively. So many a times, I think Mr. Yash also talked about long-termism. So many a times decisions are taken, but the long-term impacts are not seen. So in order to see those long-term impacts and develop policies likewise, the concerns of the youth must also be addressed. Indigenous communities would need special consideration. I think Ms. Archana has beautifully explained us about that. And we need to also invest lastly in green entrepreneurship, because that is what can drive climate finance in the coming future. So India must go green before we go old. So in Dr. Kerker's book, he actually mentions that India must go rich before we grow old. I like to tweak it a bit and say that India must go green before we go old, because usually the old population is resistant to change. And as our demographic dividend currently is young, we need to make use of it. So to conclude my talk, I know I have skipped the time a bit, but to conclude my talk, we still have a choice with ourselves. Which earth do we choose? Do we choose an earth which is more equitable, an earth which is powered by renewable sources of energy, an earth which is inclusive to all? And I don't know what that earth would actually look like, but that would definitely be better than the one we are creating right now. And the one we are creating right now can be summarized beautifully in one story. So this is a short story that actually influenced my worldview a lot, and it can also influence your worldview. So there was a small fictional town called Omelas. In Omelas, all the citizens were well-fed, they are well-read, there were no slaves and no kings, there was equality all around. It was like prosperity was there constantly. And it was a truly dream town. But that was just the face of Omelas. Once the Omelas citizens turned of a certain age, they were revealed, a certain secret was revealed to them. And the secret was that in the basement of a large building, there lived a small 6-year-old kid who was confined to a small room of 3 by 3 without any windows and just one door. The kid used to weep, the kid used to cry and say that I'll be better, please release me. But no one used to care about him. Why? Because for some unexplained reason, the happiness of Omela citizens actually depended on the suffering of this kid. And that's why they knew that that kid is there, but they let him suffer. Now, all of us might disregard this story to be merely fictional, but is it really fictional? Now, in the place of that child, put today's vulnerable communities, put today's men and women who live in actual poverty, and also put in that child's place the generation that is yet to come. Are we not sacrificing their future? And what right do we have to do that? So the choice is still in our hand, and we need to act in this decade alone and make this the decade of youth. Thank you. And a special thanks to my mentor, Dr. Amitabh Malik, my ECC team, and especially Ms. Aditi Kai. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Prithviraj, for that very insightful and motivating presentation. And it has all the talks in this session have got a very nice response on the chat box, like other talks. We will now go to the question answer session. And the first question is for Archana. It asks, what could we learn about sustainable lifestyles from communities?
Thank you so much for this question. About the sustainable practices from indigenous communities, I would like to start with sharing the context, which I feel is something which I have been reflecting and learning during this entire course. Is one thing which I would like to highlight is when we are talking about indigenous people and local communities. Over the years, over the generation, if we see, it was termed and it was said that the indigenous people are backward, the indigenous people are savage, and the indigenous people needs to be taught and underdeveloped. And there was a huge imposition of developmental paradigm, and also there was a huge wave of inferiorization of your identity, of your culture, of your tradition. And that is what, if you see now in this contemporary era, the entire world is now again slowly and gradually saying that, oh wow, really nice, indigenous people's traditional knowledge and practices is really amazing and contributing to climate action. Which again brings down to the fact is like you have demeaned and inferiorized the indigenous communities for ages and years together. And if you need to go ahead, it has to be done first by acknowledging the injustice done to the indigenous people. It has to do that enabling environment where there is need to build confidence and embrace the identity, culture, and tradition of indigenous people and local communities, and especially for young people, like young indigenous women. For myself, I think it's really, really important for young people, because this entire wave of inferiorization of your identity, culture questions yourself, who am I? And that this inferiorization is very difficult to accept yourself in this entire domain, which I feel over the years, because of the struggles and because of the sacrifices of our elders and indigenous communities and ancestors, because of their fight and because of their contribution towards climate action, slowly and gradually it has been now recognized in the IPCC reports and many important reports of UN and other international frameworks, where rights of indigenous people are recognized, where it has been said that the traditional knowledge and practices of indigenous people are crucial for the climate action. And that is, I feel, it's a way ahead to go in terms of for us that yes, slowly and gradually people are recognizing and willing to listen to us. Now it's very important for us also to speak up and for us also to share. And that's what I feel when I talk about the sustainable practices, which has been asked in the question, is like one thing which I would like to say in terms of the indigenous people is like, one, A is the way of living of indigenous people. And the second is about the traditional knowledge and practices, the governance method. So like if I briefly, very summary say that while growing up, I have always been seen in my communities that we have been eating in the leaf plates, and these leaf plates are alternative to plastic cutleries. And now when we see the plastic pollution as a major source of pollution, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that this leaf making cutleries has been existing with the indigenous people and local communities. And it's really important to support them in terms of entrepreneurial skills. And this is when we also see in terms of green jobs, like it's been talking about like green jobs in COP26 and in the international arena. So these initiatives of forest-based livelihood, of making cutleries, and not only leaf cutleries, but also making mats out of date leaves, also making utensils out of leaf plates and all of those things. So I think the entire things, articles made by the indigenous people, chairs, tables, cutleries, and mats, all of those things is really, really important to see that how indigenous people's articles can be purchased, how indigenous people's articles and entrepreneurships can be supported. And the second thing which I feel is really important is that the traditional knowledge and practices, like for example, the region I come from, like I come from Orissa, and here there's a very much prevalent active conservation practices called Thenga Pali. Thenga in Odia means stick and Pali means turn. So here, like communities are going to patrol forest, taking the sticks and going guarding the entire forest. So here it's also seen that how that Thenga, like the Thenga is kept in front of the village households area, and you, if the stick is kept in front of you, you know it's your turn to go and safeguard the forest for the day. And that's why the stick rotates, everyone gets equal participation in protecting the forest. So I want to highlight that the local governance systems, the rules and regulation which is there with the indigenous people, the traditional knowledge and practices of how they have been protecting forest needs to be taken into consideration. And another thing which I would like to say, it's also all about perspective. Like for me, for us as an indigenous communities, we are not mere part of nature, but we are nature. So the worldview of indigenous people needs to be respected and needs to be taken into consideration while making policies. And that's why I really feel that it's not about mere what indigenous people do, but it's also who indigenous people are. Like my name is Archana Soreng. The meaning of my surname Soreng in my tribal community language, that is Kharia, is rock. So there are many surnames like that, like Kiro, which is tiger, and there is surnames called Kerkita, which is bird. So it's like for me, nature is my source of identity, culture, language. And that's why I strongly feel that indigenous people should be an integral part of policy making spaces of climate action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Archana, for a very
Aditi, our minister has joined.
refreshing answer.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So we will close the question and answer session. We have run over time, and we will start with the special address for today.
Honorable Minister Ajit ji, namaskar and welcome on behalf of PIC. We're waiting for your address. This has been a session on youth perspective, converting promises to action. And we had some young people talking about this on the subject. And now we wait for your insight and your typical way of putting things straight on the face. So welcome and please start.
Thank you, Professor Malik. It is a real pleasure always interacting with PIC, and it's something I always look up to and look forward to, because more than we speaking and we saying, there's a lot to learn from you, Dr. Kirkar, Dr. Mashirkar, and the whole pool of people out there. I call it sort of like going back to the books and getting your basics right, because many times what happens is, we as politicians or as young people working for the society, we tend to have perspectives, and we have this thing called Josh, and we actually want to get things done in a very speedy manner, in a very efficient manner, in a very let's do it right here, right now types. And along with that Josh, people like you and institutions like all of you actually give us that Hosh also. So what is needed today is Hosh and Josh. So that is a very important blend for all of us to have. But the topic here is very, very relevant in terms of moving from promises to action, because as I think that's extremely relevant, because in the past 2 years, in my interaction with everyone as an environment minister, I've actually been hearing a lot of jargons, a lot of difficult words and different concepts which have been complicated to sound scientific, concepts that have been made to sound very, very complex and important. But they're actually concepts which are something which are so simple. If you break it down, it happens in your everyday life. And I think because it becomes very complex, or the terminology is so different, that we sort of take it remotely away from the people. Now, what is really important to start off with, and I'm actually coincidentally on my way from one program to another, that's why I'm addressing it from a car. But the good part is, I had come to Nagar, where I was inaugurating an ethanol plant for a sugar factory, for a distillery. And while interacting with them, I think Praj Industries has put it up for the Mura sugar plant out here. What I learned is basically they have zero liquid discharge because of the incinerator boiler and the ethanol production that they are now entering into. And they're also looking at biofuels. Now, this is where I think we're moving away from, rather moving forward from policy to implementation on ground. Because wherever we were in the last 2 years, of course, due to COVID, there's a lot of VCs happening, a lot of interactions happening globally over video conferences. What is really important is, how do you go beyond the video conferences? How do you go beyond the policy papers and studies and researches? Because everyone's doing that. How we as politicians or governments or as elected representatives can actually start implementing what we have learned about climate change and these VCs on ground? Is it really important to only speak about them, or can we actually bring them into action in this year itself? Many times when we are looking at the policy papers, when we're looking at our promises, all the promises really are about 2070, 2050, 2040. And the best part for us as governments is we sign all these MOUs for 2050, 2040, which is still 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And we feel great about it because we're like, yes, 2050, we're going to hit carbon neutral. 2070, we're going to hit carbon neutral. In politics, a lot of politicians said yesterday, we tend to take away the political promises as, हाँ ठीक है, कल चुनाव में बात हुई थी, जुमला था, अभी छोड़ दिया मैंने. But that is not something we can really afford to do with climate change, because climate change is no longer something which is as distant as our promises or as further away as our goal. We do not have the luxury of time to implement our climate promises or climate action. Now, climate action can come in three ways. Of course, mitigation is something we cannot give up on. Even though I firm believe that climate action is something we need to go ahead with, climate change is, we have meeting every Wednesday. Every time we have a session of our legislative assembly, I have MPs coming from across Maharashtra and who come to the Chief Minister's office, the Deputy Chief Minister's office, cabinet, saying, okay, we need compensation for this farm field, we need compensation for that city, we need this compensation for this village. When you ask why, it is because you've had hailstorm or unseasonal rainfall, extended mini cloud burst, drought, or a drought-like situation. And so this has been happening for the past 10, 15 years more aggressively and more often than ever before. Now, as my own experience says, in the past 10 years of being in politics, I remember in the year 2010, 2011, 2012, right up to almost 2015, there were areas in Maharashtra which were like, say, Marathwada, Uttar Maharashtra, Vidarbh, even Jawar Mukhada, as close to Mumbai as can be, where we were facing a terrible drought situation. Now, from 2017, 2018 onwards, these are the same places where we used to visit to give water in the wells through tankers or photo camps. Today, we're going there to provide relief for flash floods. And this is something which is mind-boggling, because the geography hasn't changed, the people haven't changed, people's activities haven't changed, but the weather has changed. And the demands for compensation have moved from one head of compensation to another, but the demand is the same. Now, the point is, whenever we speak about compensation and whenever these demands come up in the Legislative Assembly or the Council, I try to make a point saying, okay, this is, we have to give compensation. We have to provide basic security to people in terms of financial stability, economic safety, food safety. But we also need to realize as a political class and as society at large, why we are facing this need for compensation. What are these disasters that are coming our way? Are these anomalies anymore? No. Are these erratic weather patterns anymore? No. These are frequent weather patterns which are happening at a larger level, more harsher than ever before, and regularly in our own fields, in our own backyards, in our own lanes. This is no longer a thing for the Himalayan retreating glaciers of the Alps. or Antarctic or Arctic. It is about our own country, our own state, our own district, our own city, our own village, our own 10 yards around us. Now, when we speak about this, one of the biggest things I need to say in terms of what we need today is going beyond policies. We need to politicize climate change. And I say this very, very carefully. I say this with a great sense of responsibility, because I see this, that wherever there is, especially in our country, wherever there is films or cricket or politics, there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of action on ground about it. You have people creating all these reels and TikToks on social media. When you speak about films, you have gully cricket happening and you have films being followed, cricket being followed very closely when it's about cricket. When it is politics, especially after 2014, every discussion on our dining table is about politics in every Indian household. Now, when we start politicizing an issue like climate change, when you have political parties fighting for credit, fighting for, okay, this is climate change action that we have initiated, I think at that point in time in Indian history, or Indian future rather, we would have successful action on ground going beyond just policies. Today, I've seen that there is a new hydrogen policy that has been approved by the government of India. We have a solar alliance that we are a part of. We have a renewable energy that we are, a policy that we have. We've got an EV policy. Now, obviously, in terms of policies, in terms of areas like Swachh Bharat, Maji Vasundhara, solid waste management, grey water treatment, STPs, more or less, everything has started implementation. Everything is in a ball that is rolling. But if we actually want implementation on ground, we need to have participation of the public in a formal and informal manner. Corporates coming up, looking at converting their fleets to EVs, looking at efficiency in terms of their energy use, transport audits, more plantations in the manufacturing industries. If it's a service industry, audit your transport, your carbon footprint for energy, services, everything. In an informal manner, of course, the young and old, everyone, because I remember it's not just the job of the young people, it's not just the onus of the young people, or it's not just also the good work of the young people. You also have a generation in their late 60s, 70s, 80s that remembers the olden days where you did not have ready-to-use or on pack-and-go containers for food. You did not have multi-layered plastic as containers for wafers. You did not have masalas being packed in plastic bags that are now thrown away. In fact, one of my conversations with Dr. Mashirkar actually was very enlightening, because I was speaking to him about plastics and he was telling me about how plastic is actually a wonderful product if used responsibly. It is us as the human race that has converted plastic, or as something as beautiful as plastic, which is more durable. You don't have to cut trees for wood or any other material. It can be used more often, recycled more often, upcycled more often, to something which has become use and throw, and more often than not found in our seas, in our cows and our fish, than in our homes for better use. Now, if we can go back to how our own grandmothers used to use milk bags, slit it on the top, use the milk bag, give it back to the milkman. I think these are some of the ways that we can actually go and do this. But again, not taking much more time, I think what we really need to do, and we've begun this in Maharashtra, I've started having interactions with all the MLAs and all the MPs, getting them to acclimatize with what climate change is, getting them to be oriented with what climate change is. Because when you have a minister, when you have an MP, when you have an MLA talking about climate change to a farmer, talking about drip irrigation, saving water, better cropping patterns, getting used to climate change in terms of cropping patterns, better use of fertilizers. Or if you come to the city, talking about how we can better our footpaths, our traffic management systems, more urban forests, more rainwater percolation systems. I think it is only then and then can we actually speak about climate change with the ownership that yes, India is moving towards climate action. So my firm belief, to reiterate, is we need to politicize climate change, and that is where action on ground will begin beyond policies. Thank you.
Malik sir, you're on mute. Someone can you unmute Malik sir?
Yeah, I said very well said, Honorable Minister. Very valuable insight from a young leader. We will brief you on the proceedings that have happened, so that you will see that some of the young people have voiced exactly the same thing, that it is high time to politicize to the climate change also. Without much ado, we have today with us Dr. Vijay Kelkar, our Vice President. May I request you, sir, to give some closing remarks for this session? You're on mute, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Professor Amitabh, Malik and all the Minister Aditya Thackeray and distinguished panelists, and of course the friends. I must congratulate Professor Malik, you and your colleagues for absolutely fabulous day for me. Every minute I learned from your starting with your presentation, Ravi's presentation, and till the last one of Prithviraj's presentation, and of course, the minister gave an inspirational interpretation, and he has. I want to thank him because what I'm going to say probably draws upon some of his insights. Professor Malik, it's what I learned today is that the crisis is for the entire planet, but essentially anthropogenic in origin. It's really human beings are causing it.
Yes.
And really responsibility lies on human beings to correct it. And I think as every speaker said that you have captured the importance of this decade, because this decade is really the make or break kind of decade for the planet itself, not just for human beings, for planet, because his responsibility is on this what we do now. And I think taking the lead from what Honorable Minister said and what was said by Prithviraj and many other speakers, including Priyadarshini, I think what we need is now that we should demand every political parties to come out with climate manifesto, where the political parties give commitments on what they're going to do on climate. That should be the starting point for even people, youth should demand it, because it's their future we're talking about, and I think they would point out that their vote will depend to the party, depend on the manifesto climate. That's all. It's a one-point program. It's a climate manifesto because it's linked for many other things, automatically. If you get that right, everything will come out right. Because climate manifesto will tell you that climate doesn't differentiate between religions. It affects all the religions equally. So whole current unfortunate schism which is emerging in our society will also go away, because everybody is equal in front of nature. It is totally religion neutral, caste neutral, tribal neutral, and everything is really completely inclusiveness will ultimately come through the climate manifesto, and people will start talking about those issues rather than identity crisis and identity politics. It will shift for identity politics to the what really is needed in our country. So that is one. So I think I would urge Prithviraj to take his argument a little further and say that you must now ask the youth to participate in political parties, in elections, ask for election manifesto, ask for climate manifesto, ask for youth manifesto, because it is their life that we're talking about. So, and that will, and as Aditya just said, they will respond once there's a demand from the political demand. And also it will be very good, it will improve Indian society. What happened last 10 years, what happened to our country, which completely, the healing process will start, and we will sort of completely get rid of this divisive identity politics, which is really dividing our country and challenging. The second is ultimately what we'll do, what Archana pointed out, it will be democratic. You cannot have a climate manifesto which is undemocratic. It has to respond to all segments of society, and so it will be participative. Now, by nature of it, it will be participative. So let's make climate manifesto as an organizing principle for next decade, by which all the today's divisive politics, divisive societies, the backward-looking. Because, and second, I was thinking about what Professor Malik said, what everybody said, also what I think Minister was mentioned. We may have to rediscover Gandhiji, because what is happening, the demand will have to change. What human beings are making demands, I think we have to look at, as Gandhi used to say, the world is not too big for Indian, our need, but it's really too small for greed. And that's what the problem is. But it has to be Gandhi plus. In other words, it has to be Gandhi plus Einstein. I mean, in other words, the science and technology has to be the sort of driver along with that. So I think I'm really excited about what happened today. I learned a lot, and I'm grateful to all the speakers, because every speaker brought extremely valuable insight. And especially, I'm probably the oldest person in the audience, so I greatly benefited. I want to thank every young speaker for educating me. And the last point I want to make, and I won't speak too long, is this relates to the urgency. This, I think, the decade of change. This urgency, I think, only youth can bring it, because they have vested interest in getting it right. And frankly, is the responsibility for the entire planet is on us. We human beings are harming every organic life. Every life has been threatened. So we owe a great deal to ourselves and also to the planet. So all power to the youth, all power to our energetic and very thoughtful minister, which we have in our state, Adityaji, and also, of course, the ringing statement by Prithviraj, which is called, and I fully endorse his demand. In fact, I would ask him to go further in making his demand. And Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda said, "Arise, awake." I think this is what is very, very required for the youth, all of you. So thank you, Professor Malik, and thank you all for this wonderful day. And I look forward to tomorrow's 24 hours, to tomorrow's conference. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Kedkar, for your remarks. It was a wonderful first day. And I just request all the panelists to please switch on their cameras. We'll just quickly take a photo together. Sid, just let me know once the photo is done.
While we were waiting, one point I forgot to mention, Aditya, if you permit, can I just add that point?
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, yes.
Please.
I think this process will help what I'm proposing, and that's where I think I'll urge Prithviraj to add this point, is involve more women. We feminize the movement, because it is the women who's going to bring greater sensitivity, greater inclusiveness, and they are really at the end, they are the sufferers. So I'll only add that point. Let's have much larger role to women in this climate manifesto, because that will ensure that.
So Dr. Kedkar sir.
Yes, Aditya. Yes, Aditya, bola.
Yes, Kedkar sir. In fact, for women, Maharashtra government, we have got this internship with C40 called Women for Climate. We've got 30 mentors and 30 mentees in terms of climate leadership for women. So that is something we're actually actively pushing.
Good, very good. I'm delighted. But I'm saying, as our friend youngster, you get more women, because women will be far more concerned about others than, I'm sorry to say, than the male counterparts. Because nurturing to them.
Yes.
So that for the great concluding remarks, and it's a very apt conclusion, both the climate manifesto and including women and all communities and inclusive development models. We request all the audience to join us tomorrow again for next series of interesting talks and perspectives and ideas. Please use the same link as today to log in, and we'll meet you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Till then, thank you, and we can close this session. I again thank everyone for.
Thank you very much from me as the convener.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya.